Unchan was a quiet kid who got bullied every single day and never fought back, not even when his best friend ended up in the hospital. But everything changed the night he watched a tiny girl behind a convenience store counter knock out 3 grown thugs in a row using nothing but jiu-jitsu. That one moment lit a fire inside him that had never been there before. He walked straight up to her the very next day and asked her to train him. However, before any of this, at school, some students are doing a live stream about 2 boys who are about to start boxing in classroom. It turns out, the chat for the stream is going crazy over this match while the rest of the class curiously wonders who is going to win. At that same moment, 2 girls came pushing and shoving their way through the crowd, both of them visibly furious at the boys for having the nerve to organize another boxing match right there in that spot. One of the girls made it clear that she had already warned them before and stated firmly that she would go straight to the teacher if something like this ever happened again. One of the boys brushed it off and shot back that it was not really a big deal at all, arguing it was nothing more than a casual and friendly sparring session, and that both fighters were even wearing proper sparring gear on top of that. The girl was not buying it though, and she fired back by asking whether what was happening in front of them honestly looked anything like simple sparring, given that one of the guys was going absolutely wild and hammering the other one without showing any signs of letting up. Before anyone could argue further, the guy in the white shirt caught a clean uppercut right as the time ran out and the match came to its end. The crowd immediately erupted into cheers directed at the other fighter, with everyone pointing out that his combinations looked noticeably sharper and more polished than they had been before, while the guy in the white shirt had barely managed to throw even a single punch in return. The winning fighter then reached up and pulled off his helmet, turning toward Unchan and checking in on whether he was doing alright, and added that his combos had genuinely gotten better all thanks to Unchan being his practice partner. The person responsible for beating up the white shirt guy turned out to be Jae, who casually turned to Unchan right after and asked if he wanted to join him for a coke. Right at that moment, one of the other students rushed over to let Jae know that a teacher was actively looking for him, which immediately changed his plans. Without hesitating, Jae quickly shoved some money into the guy's hand, told him to grab his own coke, and took off running before anything else could be said. Outside, Unchan got himself some coke and stood there drinking it slowly, his mind replaying the way Jae had thrown punches and landed various kinds of combos on the white shirt guy with surprising ease and speed. His thoughts then drifted even further back into the past, pulling up a memory of a time when he had been walking down the street and suddenly stumbled upon a group of guys brutally beating up a heavyset person, a sight that had shaken him deeply and left him feeling unsettled all over again just thinking about it. Later that same evening, Unchan sat down at his desk but found it nearly impossible to direct his attention toward his homework, his mind continuing to wander in too many different directions at once. His mother picked up on the fact that something was off and asked him whether he had actually eaten a real meal or had once again just defaulted to ramen, which had become his predictable and all too familiar habit. Unchan explained that the fridge contained nothing except chicken breasts, which was exactly why he had decided to go with ramen instead. His mother responded by pointing out that chicken breasts were actually really good and healthy for the body. Unchan's mother worked as a yoga instructor, and she had built up a decent amount of fame, even making television appearances every now and then. Yoga had essentially taken over her entire life after she picked it up as a hobby following the death of Unchan's father, and because of that, Unchan had been pulled into it as his own hobby from a pretty young age as well. After finishing up his yoga session later on, Unchan headed out to grab something to drink, and while he was there, he overheard a nearby guy striking up a conversation with the female cashier, mentioning that she used to come in to work out around that same hour. The cashier revealed that she had practiced jiu-jitsu but had since quit. Unchan, hearing this, quietly wondered to himself whether jiu-jitsu was some kind of dance, because looking at her, she seemed way too small and delicate to be any kind of serious athlete. Shortly afterward, the guy who had been keeping the cashier company suddenly bolted out of the store in a hurry, and almost immediately after that, 3 thugs came strolling toward the entrance with an obvious attitude. It quickly became clear that the 3 boys had every intention of getting their hands on some cigarettes. As they walked, the 3 of them huddled together and started scheming among themselves, deciding that the one with blonde hair would be the one to step up to the cashier and straight up demand that she hand over the cigarettes, threatening to smack her if she gave him any trouble about it. The other 2 boys hyped him up enthusiastically, telling him that nobody would ever dare stand up against him anyway, so he might as well grab an extra pack for himself while he was already at it. As the group passed by Unchan on their way in, the blonde-haired guy reached over and smacked him on the head for absolutely no reason whatsoever, not even bothering to acknowledge him afterward. Once they were inside, the cashier did not waste a single second and immediately informed the thug straight to his face that she was not allowed to sell cigarettes to anyone without first checking their ID. The thug leaned in and warned her that she had better just hand them over before things got worse for her, and then had the nerve to ask where the other female cashier was, the one he had apparently made a habit of hitting on before. Despite the thug's threatening attitude, the cashier stood her ground once more and refused to hand anything over, repeating firmly that she absolutely needed to see his ID before any transaction could happen. That response pushed the thug completely over the edge, and in a burst of rage he began violently scattering items off the shelves and onto the floor without any hesitation. When the cashier bent down and began trying to pick everything up, he made it even worse by kicking more stuff around carelessly before attempting to simply walk out the door like nothing had happened. The cashier was not about to let that slide though, and she followed him outside, planting herself in front of him and demanding that he pay 1,301 to cover the cost of everything he had damaged and destroyed inside. In response, the thug stepped right up close to her and slapped her hard across the face, having the audacity to tell her that none of this would have ever gone this far if she had just listened to him and handed over what he had been asking for from the very beginning. Unchan had been standing there watching the whole thing unfold the entire time, and a conflicted thought crept into his mind as he wondered seriously whether he should step in and do something to help her out. The thug then reared back and tried to hit her a second time, but this time around the girl was ready for it, swiftly dodging the incoming blow and using a sharp and well-executed jiu-jitsu move to slam him hard onto the ground. She uses arm triangle choke to keep him on the ground that completely knocks him out. The bully's friends then charges at the girl to beat her up, but she uses rear naked choke to knock out one of them. The last bully then happens to get the girl, but before he could do something, she uses triangle choke technique using her legs and knocks him out. Just then, the main bully wakes up and finds his friends on the floor. The girl asks him if he wants to fight again, saying this time she is going to break every bone in his body. The bully gets scared and runs away from there. That night, Unchan gets back home and does some research about Jiu-jitsu online. The very next day, a boy came storming up to Unchan absolutely seething with anger, making it clear that the whole situation had stemmed from the fact that Jiu had been forced to pay out of pocket after their group ended up losing the game, and according to him, that was entirely Unchan's fault. Unchan attempted to defend himself by explaining that Jiu had voluntarily said he would cover everything himself, but the ramen head guy was not interested in hearing any of that and insisted that Unchan should have stepped up and stopped him from doing so and handled the payment himself instead. Having heard enough, the ramen head guy made up his mind that it was time to teach Unchan a lesson about how things worked. He forced Unchan to put on sparring gear and then brought up the fact that he had already watched footage of Unchan's fighting from a video clip that had been going around, and with a mocking tone he questioned whether that embarrassing performance was really all that Unchan had to offer. The guy then positioned himself right in front of Unchan and told him to go ahead and throw a punch directly at his face, while the rest of the group stood around with their phones out and began recording everything. Unchan clenched his fists and did everything in his power to keep himself under control and avoid doing anything that he would later regret. However, the ramen head guy kept pushing and repeatedly egged him on to just throw the punch already, and the relentless pressure caused something deep inside Unchan to stir, pulling up a haunting memory of a particular person from his past that hit him so hard emotionally that he slowly sank down onto his knees right there on the spot. The boys who had been recording the whole thing immediately got excited when they saw that, saying that the clip was going to rack up a massive number of views. The ramen head guy tells them that he had not even laid a single finger on Unchan to make that happen. Just then, a guy with blonde hairs happens to approach Unchan, and gets him out of this awkward situation. On his way back home, Unchan notices that the same blonde guy is following him while the girls walking nearby can't stop staring at him as they find him super hot. Later at bus stop, all the people standing nearby stares at the guy Oswell, and a girl even wants to take a picture with him. She then runs towards the blonde guy and makes an awkward pose while her friend clicks the picture. After that, everyone on the bus stop joins in the shot and takes a group picture. However, Unchan thinks that this is all weird, and quickly gets on the bus, wondering if that guy was looking for him. The next day, a girl talks about how a celebrity has come to this school, but her friend doesn't believe. Following that, absolutely everyone around the school could not seem to stop themselves from turning their heads and staring at the new boy who had just recently enrolled and joined the student body. The general consensus among the students was that he had clearly come from somewhere abroad, and on top of that, a lot of them thought he had the kind of striking and polished appearance that made him look like a well-known celebrity idol straight out of a magazine. Even the ramen head bully from the day before took notice of all the commotion going on around him and tells Jiu that while he had been away, a brand new student had just been placed into their class and that the guy had come all the way from the States. What made the whole situation feel even uncomfortable was the fact that the new student seemed completely fixated on Unchan specifically, continuously sending long and unbroken stares in his direction, which immediately gave Unchan an uneasy feeling that something is not quite right. Right at that moment, Jae confidently strolls up to the new guy and breaks the silence by mentioning that he had heard he is from the States, and goes on to explain that he himself gets the opportunity to visit the States every now and then because of his father's line of work, so he is pretty convinced that the two of them will have no trouble getting along well together. Jae adds that if the food around school is not really hitting the way the new guy is used to, he would be more than happy to personally take him to a good American restaurant nearby. Despite all of that, the American guy pays absolutely zero attention to anything Jae just said, turns away from him completely, and walks straight toward Unchan as if Jae had never even opened his mouth. He then introduces himself as Jordan Gill and asks Unchan to tell him about himself. Before Unchan even has a chance to get a single word in, Jae cuts him off and casually informs him that he and his friends are starting to get thirsty, and that Unchan should head out and grab them all something to drink. Jordan, hearing this, immediately decides that he is going to tag along with Unchan as well, assuming based on the situation that they are simply making a quick trip over to the school snack bar together. As the two of them make their way there, Jordan keeps the conversation going non-stop, enthusiastically sharing that he has always dreamed of visiting a Korean school snack bar ever since he could remember, explaining that back in the States everything like that is always located so incredibly far away and out of reach. Unchan walks beside him and feels a wave of irritation washing over him almost instantly, coming to the very quick and certain conclusion in his head that this guy absolutely never stops talking under any circumstances. After a little while, Unchan returns with sodas and hands one over to Jae, who takes a long satisfied sip and remarks that a cold drink always manages to taste so much better right after finishing up a really solid workout. Without much else to say, Jae then turns away and leaves Unchan standing there with his friend, who is apparently going to be sparring and boxing with Unchan next. Once school is finally over for the day, Unchan wastes absolutely no time and takes off running as fast as his legs can carry him, making a deliberate effort to dodge and avoid even Jordan, because all he genuinely wants at that point is a little bit of quiet and peace entirely to himself. He eventually makes his way over to an arcade area nearby and settles in to play one of the games, but his focus is suddenly shattered when he looks up and realizes with a jolt of surprise that a brand new challenger has unexpectedly jumped into his game out of nowhere. Seeing that, Unchan thinks about his past when he came to this arcade gaming zone with his group of friends. Unchan keeps losing the game and his friends told him that he don't stand a chance against anyone as he is just a loser. Unchan smiles and says that he can get the opponent this time, but one of his friends pushes him aside, saying he is going to lose again as usual. The fatty tells Unchan that the other team's Byongo is using the same skill to face everyone. He also says that he won against him because he knows the ultimate combo and that he is telling him because he is his best friend. Back to the present, the opposing player manages to defeat Unchan in the game, and when Unchan glances around to see who he has just been playing against, it turns out to be none other than Jordan standing right there. The two of them play together for a little while longer before eventually heading outside, and Jordan cannot get over the fact that a place like that arcade still exists and is still up and running. Unchan gets curious and asks him where he picked up that combo he used during the game, but Jordan just smiles and tells him that it is going to have to stay a secret for now. Later that same night, Unchan finds himself going down a rabbit hole on his computer, doing more research on Jiu-jitsu and coming across a huge number of video clips covering the topic. While going through all of them, one particular clip ends up stopping him in his tracks. The clip shows a smaller guy going up against someone who is literally twice his size, and completely against what Unchan expects to see, the smaller guy takes full control of the fight and dominates the bigger opponent without much trouble at all. It is the kind of thing that would have been really hard to believe if he was not watching it happen with his own eyes right there on the screen. What sticks with him is not just how good the smaller guy is at jiu-jitsu, but the fact that he has the guts to stand up against someone so much bigger than him without backing down even a little. Unchan sits there afterward and wonders whether he could ever become someone like that if he actually went ahead and learned jiu-jitsu himself. Unchan briefly entertained the thought of bringing the whole thing up with his mother and asking for her input on it, but that idea was immediately shot down in his own mind the moment he recalled the time he had approached her about wanting to do taekwondo, and she had shut him down on the spot, telling him not to ever bring something like that up to her again. When Unchan showed up to attend his usual yoga classes later on, he was caught completely off guard by the sight of every single woman in the entire building absolutely losing their minds with excitement over Jordan, who had somehow managed to track the place down and find his way there on his own. Unchan's mother pulled him aside and advised him warmly to treat Jordan well and be kind to him, explaining that he came across as a genuinely decent person and that having someone like him around was going to end up drawing a whole wave of brand new members into their yoga classes. After pushing through his very first yoga session, Jordan was left in such rough shape physically that even walking in a straight line became a serious challenge for him. Unchan took the opportunity to inform him that there were actually a whole bunch of different levels to work through, and that the class they had just completed happened to be one of the most demanding ones of all, an advanced style known as Ashtanga Yoga. Later on, Unchan made his way over to the same convenience store from before to pick something up, and to his surprise he spotted the same girl from the previous incident standing there behind the counter. A part of him quietly debated with himself over whether it would be appropriate to go ahead and check in on her and ask if she was doing all right. He ultimately worked up just enough courage to ask her if she was okay, but the moment the words left his mouth he was completely overwhelmed by a rush of embarrassment and immediately turned around and took off running straight to the nearby park. At the park, Unchan notices that when the cashier girl leaves for home, a guy wearing a black mask is following her with metal rod. Before the guy could hit the girl, Unchan manages to block the attack using his bag, and crashes on the ground. The guy wearing the mask doesn't give up and continues to attack the girl who dodges the moves. The guy then reaches up and pulls off his hat and mask, and the face underneath turns out to be the exact same thug who had shown up at her shop not too long ago demanding cigarettes. Without thinking twice, Unchan grabs onto the thug's leg, refusing to let him just walk away from the situation that easily. In response, the thug winds back and drives a hard kick straight into Unchan's chest, sending him back, and the moment that happens the girl immediately takes off running toward Unchan to check on him. The thug then turns his attention to the girl and makes it very clear that whatever move she is thinking about pulling, he is not about to fall for any of her tricks a second time around. Right at that moment, a towing truck suddenly rolls up and comes to a stop nearby, and a heavy-set guy climbs out of it and makes his presence known by announcing plainly that playtime is now over. The heavy-set guy then starts walking calmly in the thug's direction and tells him straight up to go ahead and hand over the metal rod that he is gripping onto, but the thug's nerves start getting the better of him and he warns the guy to stop right where he is and not come any closer. The heavy-set guy does not listen though and keeps moving forward at a steady pace, calmly repeating his demand for the thug to just hand the rod over, which only pushes the thug further over the edge as he threatens that if the guy dares to take even one more step forward, he is going to swing the rod without any hesitation. After that, the thug swings the metal rod directly toward the old man and ends up ripping right through his jacket in the process. Without making a big deal out of it, the old man simply reaches up and peels his torn jacket off, and what he reveals underneath it completely changes the energy of the whole situation, as his body turns out to be absolutely massive and packed with muscle. The sight of it hits the thug like a wall and he gets so scared that he stumbles and falls straight to the ground, but before things get any worse for him, he scrambles back up onto his feet as fast as he can and starts apologizing like crazy, promising that he is never going to bother anyone around here ever again. The moment the thug turns and takes off running, the old man shifts his attention over to Unchan and helps him get sorted, telling him that he is actually pretty impressive for stepping in the way he did. The old man then gets a good look at the girl and immediately recognizes her, calling her Master Hong and telling her that the gym genuinely has not felt the same ever since she left, and asking her when she is planning on coming back. The girl turns to Unchan and thanks him for jumping in and helping out and then whispers to him that he should go ahead and ask the old man's companion out. Meanwhile, somewhere nearby, a random guy is standing off to the side and secretly capturing everything that just went down on his camera without anyone noticing. Later on, the old man gives Unchan a ride back home, and Unchan jumps out of the car and runs inside feeling happy, thinking that he finally got a real chance to talk to that girl. The next day, Jordan shows up carrying lunch that he had spent time putting together the night before, telling Unchan that he stumbled across this really amazing recipe online and just had to try it out. While he is setting everything up, Jordan spots a bandage sitting on Unchan's face and immediately asks him what went down, and Unchan keeps it simple and tells him that he ran into a bit of trouble the day before and leaves it at that. Jordan is not really taking no for an answer though and basically forces Unchan into sitting down and trying his dish whether he feels like it or not, but right in the middle of all of that Unchan's attention gets pulled away as he notices a guy wearing glasses making his way directly toward him with a very deliberate look on his face. The guy reaches out and grabs a tight fistful of Unchan's hair and starts yanking on it hard, and the reason behind the whole outburst turns out to be the fact that he is furious at Unchan for swooping in and helping the cashier Yunha, because in his mind that move cost him his shot with her and he is not over it even a little bit. The guy then straightens up and introduces himself, making it very clear that he is the assistant co-manager of the biggest jiu-jitsu online community around called Let's Do It Jiu-jitsu, and on top of that he proudly declares himself to be Yunha's #1 fan above everyone else. Unchan turns and looks at him and asks the obvious question of how he even knew who he was to begin with, pointing out that the two of them have never been in the same place or spoken to each other at any point before this moment. Before the heavy-set guy wraps things up and heads out, he stops and leaves Unchan with one last warning delivered in a very plain and straightforward tone, telling him that it would be in his best interest to stay away from Yunha from here on out. Deep down, however, what the heavy-set guy does not bother mentioning out loud is that Unchan has absolutely no clue that his face is currently plastered all over the school website, with his video clip having racked up more hits than anything else on there. Unho pulls up the video clip online and watches it, and the whole thing leaves him with a pretty low opinion of Unchan, thinking to himself that the guy comes across as nothing more than a pathetic loser, and on top of that he is convinced that everyone around them sees him exactly the same way, including Suyun. On his way out, Jordan catches up to him and grabs him by the shoulder, falling into step right beside him and walking along with him. After class wraps up, Jordan turns to Unchan and asks if he is up for heading to the arcade together, but Unchan does not give him any kind of response at all, which immediately strikes Jordan as a little strange and off. Unchan finally explains that exams are starting the very next day, which means he really needs to buckle down and focus on studying for English since it happens to be the subject he struggles with the most out of everything. Jordan, however, steps up without hesitation and volunteers to help him out, pointing out that he is completely fluent in English after having spent a significant part of his life living abroad and picking the language up naturally along the way. That same night, Jordan and Unchan make plans and meet up at the library to get some studying done together. After grinding through the material for a decent stretch of time, Unchan decides he needs a coffee break and gets up to go grab one, and while he is on his way he unexpectedly runs right into Suyun standing there. Shortly after that, another girl also appears out of nowhere and asks Unchan what exactly brings him all the way out to this particular neighborhood. Unchan explains that the area feels a lot less crowded and busy compared to other spots, so he figured it would make for a much easier and more focused place for them to get some studying done, but the girl immediately gets curious and asks him who he has come with. Right on cue, Jordan appears, asking Unchan whether these girls are hitting on him. Unchan quickly whispers to him to cool it, filling him in that the two girls are actually Shubin and Suyun from their own class. After that, all four of them pull up chairs and settle in to study together as a group, and Unchan sits there barely able to wrap his head around the fact that he is actually getting to sit down and study right alongside Suyun. One of the girls then brings up the fact that since Jordan had been such a big help to everyone with English earlier that day, it would only be fair for them to treat him to some tekbaki the following day after the exam wraps up, and then they could all get together and study some more afterward. Later that night, after everything has settled down, Unchan finds his thoughts drifting back to the memory of the fatty bringing up Jiu-jitsu earlier, and it gets him curious enough that he starts searching around online trying to find a community connected to it. Unchan pulls up a clip of the finals match being played out between Yunha and her opponent Hwang Subin, who happens to be a member of a team called Young Jiu-jitsu. The referee handling the match turns out to be none other than Master Jun from Korea's top team, and right from the very start, before the match even gets going, Yunha makes it a point to refuse to touch gloves with her opponent, which seems to just be her usual way of doing things. The live streamer covering the whole event turns out to be the same heavy-set guy who had messed with Unchan's hair before, and he is going absolutely wild on the stream, hollering that Yunha is completely locked in and totally in her own world right now, and that at this point the only thing she is seeing in front of her is prey waiting to be hunted down. The match kicks off with Yunha wasting absolutely no time, immediately going for the first takedown and putting 2 points on the board for herself right out of the gate. Hwang then fights back with a really solid defensive move that manages to hold things together for her, but as it turns out that ends up working against her anyway since Yunha happens to strongly prefer being in the top position and that is exactly where she ends up. The crowd watching all of this is completely convinced that Yunha carries some kind of explosive power with her every time she competes, almost as if she brings an unstoppable storm crashing through everything that tries to stand in her way. Yunha tries to attack but Hwang blocked it and she is showing them that she belongs in the finals. Yunha manages to break the guard wide and continues to attack Hwang. However, Hwang managed to block Yunha's move efficiently that gets her to be a bit shaken. The heavy-set guy finds himself genuinely taken aback as he thinks about the fact that this is the very first time he has ever seen Yunha's guard pass get blocked not just once but twice in a row, which to him is a completely unexpected display of some seriously high-level skill. Now the match is sitting right at the halfway point, and Yunha is visibly starting to run out of gas after failing to pull off the guard pass the way she had been going for. Huang on the other hand is putting on a really impressive performance, and nobody in the crowd seems to have seen it coming that a blue belt would be capable of showing off such a high-level guard game the way she is right now. With only 40 seconds left on the clock, Huang spots an opening and decides right away that she is going for it. She launches into her omoplata technique and drives Yunha hard into the ground with it, and while Yunha tries her best to shift and move out of it, Huang ends up wrenching her arm in the process, which causes Yunha to let out a scream that echoes through the whole place. Snapping back to the present, Jae-wee is sitting in class looking visibly irritated and jealous as he watches practically every single student crowding around Jordan, all of them desperately trying to get the right answers from him before the exam. On his way out of the building with his friends, a guy suddenly walks up to Jordan and tells him that the teacher is looking for him and wants to see him right away. Jordan heads off on his own to track the teacher down, but when he gets there, instead of finding any teacher, he finds himself standing alone with two bullies blocking his way. Out of nowhere, the bullies suddenly receive a text notification, and the moment they read it, their whole mood flips upside down, as it turns out that their Bruno Jackson concert tickets have just been cancelled, sending both of them into a complete and total freakout. Jordan takes one look at the situation and casually mentions that this is probably exactly why Bruno had told him personally that he was going to be tied up and busy the last time they had spoken. The bullies stop dead in their tracks and stare at him, completely thrown off, and ask him whether he actually knows Bruno on a personal level. Without making a huge deal out of it, Jordan simply pulls out his phone and dials Bruno up on a video call right then and there. The bullies can barely contain themselves as they get to speak directly to Bruno through the screen, and after everyone has had their moment, Jordan wraps the call up and ends it. The second the call cuts off, the bullies completely lose it in the best way possible, jumping around and going on about how they just got to talk to Bruno Jackson and how something they had only ever dreamed about has actually just become real. Before the celebration can go on any longer though, Jae-wee steps forward and beat both of them up on the spot for messing up and ruining the plan he had put together. Later that evening, Unchan and the rest of the group are settled into their usual spots at the library, grinding away at their exam prep together. Unchan sits there and finds himself thinking about how there has genuinely been so much more to laugh about ever since Jordan showed up and became part of the group. Just then, Suyun shifts herself a little closer to Unchan and brings up the fact that she has something she needs to talk to him about. Meanwhile, the old-looking guy who is actually still pretty young but just happens to carry an appearance that makes him look way older than he really is makes his way over to the convenience store where Yunha works. The heavy-set guy also happens to be in the exact same store at the same time, and he is busy thinking to himself about how his last uploaded clip pulled in a crazy amount of views, and now he is already cooking up his next move, which involves snapping some pictures of Yunha while she is on the clock at the convenience store. The big guy catches him in the middle of doing exactly that and wastes no time dragging him straight over to Yunha, but when she gets a look at him she makes it pretty clear that she has absolutely no idea who this person even is. Right at that moment, Unchan happens to walk through the door and immediately plays it completely cool, acting as though he has never seen the big guy before in his life. The heavy-set guy then turns his attention to Unchan and asks him what exactly someone like him, who he considers a total outcast, is doing hanging around with someone who looks like a gangster. Unchan fires back and sets the record straight, telling him that the guy is not a gangster at all and that he simply drives a tow truck for a living. Yunha then turns to Unchan and lets him know that he does not need to worry about paying for anything today, explaining that she has not even properly thanked him yet for what he did for her the other day. Right at that point, Huang, the same girl who had gone up against Yunha in that match before, also walks through the store entrance and shows up out of nowhere. Unchan asks the fatty if she was Huang, but the guy gets surprised to see that Unchan knows about her. The fatty shares that after watching Huang's match against Yunha, he decided to dig around and do some research on her, and what he found out is that she had actually been training with a team called Black Octopus over in the States. He goes even further and breaks down exactly what that means, explaining that Black Octopus is not just any ordinary team but is actually a pretty prestigious and well-respected organization that is led by none other than Enrio Garcia, who currently holds the title of world champion. On top of all of that, he adds that ever since Huang got herself under Andrio's guidance and started training with that level of coaching behind her, she has been going through both the American tournaments and the local ones like they are nothing. She has been sweeping through the competition without running into much resistance along the way, and a huge chunk of that has to do with the simple fact that Yunha has not been around during that whole stretch to give her any kind of real challenge worth worrying about. Unchan takes all of that in and then honestly admits that his focus has pretty much always stayed on local competitors more than anything happening on an international scale, and that when it comes to black belts he only really knows a small handful of the ones who have gotten famous enough to cross his radar. which makes it genuinely tough for him to keep up with everyone else when the information he has access to is so limited to begin with. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Huang turns to Yunhe and asks her straight up whether she is completely done with competing for good, and follows it up by saying that going up against her was genuinely one of the most fun experiences she has had in a match. Huang then opens up a little more and tells Yunhe that she holds a pretty unique place in her memory, explaining that Yunhe is actually the first person who has ever managed to get a takedown on her, and because of that she had been genuinely looking forward to the idea of the two of them meeting again for one final showdown at the December tournament. As she gets ready to leave, Huang turns back one last time and leaves Yunhe with something to think about, telling her that even if they do end up crossing paths again in a rematch, the outcome is still going to go the same way unless Yunhe manages to figure out the key points she has been missing. The following day, the exams finally come to an end and the girls make sure to go out of their way to thank Jordan for all the help he had put in throughout the whole study process. Jordan then suggests to everyone that they should all plan to hang out together sometime next week, throwing in that even though he has been living in Seoul for a little while now, he has not really had the chance to get out and actually explore the city all that much. The girls light up at the idea and enthusiastically agree to go out with both Jordan and Unchan whenever they set something up. After all of that wraps up, Unchan heads over to the same arcade as usual to get some games in with Jordan, and while he is there the familiar feeling creeps up on him again as his mind drifts back to memories of his past with his old friend. Later that night, Unchan turns to Jordan and casually asks if he wants to come back to his place and hang out. Jordan agrees and Unchan brings him over, and the moment they walk in Unchan's mother looks genuinely surprised and touched, wondering out loud what kind of special occasion this must be since it is literally the first time Unchan has ever brought a friend through the door. Jordan makes a great first impression right off the bat by handing Unchan's mother a bouquet of flowers he had brought along, and she smiles and heads into the kitchen to put something together for the both of them. Jordan takes a look around and cannot hide the fact that he is genuinely caught off guard by how big Unchan's house actually turns out to be. A little while later, Unchan's mother comes back out and sets down some pizza in front of them, and Jordan digs in and finds that he actually really likes it, even as she mentions with a warm smile that it has been quite a long time since she last cooked for any of Unchan's friends. By the time the night winds all the way down, Jordan ends up deciding to just stay over at Unchan's place rather than heading back out. Following that, the story takes a step back and gives us a look into Yunhe's past, starting from when she was growing up and was noticeably smaller than pretty much everyone else her age around her. Despite her size though, losing was something she absolutely could not stand, and when it came to going up against a bigger opponent the only move she really had at her disposal was to bite them. The boys around her picked up on that habit pretty quickly and started calling her Bulldog as a nickname, and while that stuck with her, what also stuck was a burning desire deep inside her to become stronger. She begged her mom over and over again to let her drop piano and switch over to learning a self-defense martial art instead, and she eventually got her way. From that point on, Yunhe never once misses a single day of practice, and rather than it feeling like a chore, she genuinely enjoys the feeling of getting a little bit stronger with each day that passes. One of the moments she looks back on with the most pride is the day she stands up in front of the entire school and receives an award for her achievements, a memory that clearly means a great deal to her. After that day things shift noticeably, as the boys stop calling her Bulldog altogether and her reputation starts growing to the point where she even gets a television appearance at some point. When she gets to high school, she walks into a situation where she spots a group of guys going after and messing with one of her close friends. By this point Yunhe is no longer the tiny kid she once was and has grown into someone much bigger and stronger than before, but the reality of the situation hits her hard as she comes to terms with the fact that no matter how much training she has put in, taking on 3 fully grown men who are bigger than her is simply not something she is able to do on her own. It was the first time she got beaten that badly, her kicks and punches felt so weak, and it felt as if her hard training had gone up in smoke. Then, she stumbled upon Jiu-jitsu. This sport wasn't flashy but it was practical. Yunhe immediately connected with its fighting style and about a year into training, she wanted to test how far her skills have grown, so she took part in her first Jiu-jitsu tournament. Yunhe ends up taking home the silver medal and receives a whole lot of praise from people around her for the way she performed throughout the competition, but deep down none of it feels like enough and she walks away completely unsatisfied with the result. What she does pick up on though is the way her coach keeps looking over at her with an expression that carries something that feels a lot like genuine concern for her. Back to the present, Jordan and his friends are busy throwing around ideas and mapping out all the places they want to hit up for their upcoming trip together. At the exact same time, Jae-wee is sitting off to the side with his mind working overtime, quietly cooking up some kind of plan that he is hoping will let him get his revenge on Jordan once and for all. When gym class rolls around, Jae casually walks up to Jordan and Unchan and asks them if they are down to get a 3-on-3 basketball game going. Since Jordan's team happens to be one player short of what they need, Jordan looks around and asks if anyone nearby would be interested in jumping in and filling the spot, but nobody steps up or says a single word in response. It comes out that there is a bit of history behind the silence, as one particular boy had actually run against Jae for student body president at some point before, but ended up getting into an accident that forced him to drop out of the race entirely. Right as the awkward silence is stretching on, a strange guy who has his face covered up with a mask suddenly steps forward out of nowhere and says that he wants in on the game. The match starts off with Jordan showing amazing performance. The ball then gets to the guy wearing a mask who is head-to-head with Jae. The masked guy throws out a fake push to throw Jae completely off balance, and then smoothly slides the ball back over to Unchan, who reads the situation perfectly and fires it right back to the masked guy the moment he gets himself close enough to the basket, and he puts it in cleanly for the score. The match keeps on going and the ball finds its way back into the masked guy's hands once again, but this time around Jae wastes no time and plants himself firmly right in front of him, throwing up a tight defensive wall that cuts off pretty much all of his options. Rather than trying to force something difficult on his own, the masked guy makes the smarter call and dishes the ball out to Jordan instead, but Jordan almost immediately runs into the exact same problem as yet another defensive wall closes in on him and leaves him with nowhere to go. With no real better option staring him in the face, Jordan makes the decision to flip the ball over to Unchan and tells him to just take a breath and stay relaxed since their team is already sitting comfortably ahead on the scoreboard. The moment he hears that, Jae locks in and charges at Unchan as hard and fast as he possibly can in an attempt to strip the ball right out of his hands. But Unchan keeps his composure and casually glides around him without much trouble before putting the ball up and into the basket somewhere, shooting around casually with his closest friend, and during that relaxed session the two of them end up making a bet with each other where whoever manages to hit 10 baskets first takes the whole thing. Cutting back to the present, the girls who have been watching from the like it is nothing. Then the moment that turns everything completely upside down finally arrives, as the guy in the mask pulls it off, and standing there underneath it, the entire time turns out to be none other than Bruno Jackson himself. The following morning, Unchan's mother comes in and wakes him up earlier than usual, telling him to get himself together, eat his breakfast, and get ready to head out for school. Once he gets to school, Unchan crosses paths with Jordan almost right away, and Jordan is walking around with a mask and sunglasses covering his face, explaining that ever since Bruno Jackson showed up and made his appearance, people have been coming at him non-stop asking for pictures and all kinds of other stuff. After that, when lunch break arrives, pretty much the entire school pours outside all at once to catch Bruno putting on a performance, and the energy around the whole thing is huge. When the group eventually makes their way back to class together along with the girls, they walk in and notice that there is a brand new student sitting there that none of them recognize. During the break, the group huddles together and starts tossing around the idea that maybe he transferred over from another school somewhere, but the girls shut that down quickly and reveal that the new student, Jiujitsu, was actually expelled from his previous school. She goes on to explain the whole story behind it, saying that there had been a kid named Min in the class next door who had been running against Jae in the student body president race. At some point during the campaign, what people were calling a small argument between the two sides apparently turned out to be a lot more serious than that and was really more of a flat-out beating when everything came to light. The aftermath of the whole thing was pretty rough, as Min ended up having to be taken to the hospital while Jae walked away from it all and automatically took the president title without any further competition. As for Jiujitsu, he ended up taking the fall for everything and got expelled because of it. What makes the whole thing even messier is that plenty of people around school seem to believe that Jae was actually the one pulling the strings behind the whole situation, but without any solid proof backing that up and with nobody feeling brave enough to step forward and say something, the entire thing just quietly faded away and Jiujitsu's expulsion became the end of the story. Jordan tries to wrap his head around why Bruno would even put himself at risk like that just for the sake of Jae of all people. The girl explains that there is actually some real history sitting behind all of that, going back to the fact that the two of them have known each other all the way since junior high. She breaks it down by explaining that right at the start of the semester, Jae had managed to build up a friend group pretty fast thanks to the natural charm he carries around with him, and that same charm ended up carrying him all the way to becoming class president on the back of how popular he had gotten. Things start to shift though when the second semester class president election comes around, and a kid named Cholsu, who had basically been invisible throughout the entire first semester, suddenly gets put forward as a candidate for the position. Then one day, the girl happens to be in the right place at the right time and witnesses something that shocks her, as she sees Jae shoving Cholsu right off the building, and the only thing that keeps the situation from being completely devastating is the fact that Chulsu somehow walks away without any severe injuries. After that, the girl goes and finds Jaewi on her own and confronts him directly, telling him flat out that she saw exactly what he did to Chulsu and demanding to know why he has not stepped up and come clean about it. She makes it very clear that if he does not go and turn himself in willingly, she is going to go ahead and tell everyone herself that he was the one responsible for what happened. Jaewi does not even flinch when he hears that and simply looks back at her and tells her to go right ahead and try to prove it. Back in present, Jordan is taking his yoga class with Unchan as usual, and Unchan thinks that he has improved a lot since his first lesson. After walking Jordan back to his home, Unchan runs into the same fatty from before. He asks Unchan where he is going tomorrow, but Unchan is furious at him for scaring him, and asks if he is a stalker. The fatty then asks him if he get permission to take jiu-jitsu lessons, and Unchan replies that he is going to try asking tomorrow, but he don't know if she is going to say yes as she hates that sort of thing. The fatty also throws in that he has been hearing word that Jinsu is back, and says that it must be a pretty unsettling and scary feeling for Unchan knowing that someone like that is now back in the same class as him. The heavy-set guy also wonders out loud what kind of school would actually go ahead and allow someone as troubled and problematic as Jinsu to re-enroll in the first place. As the two of them are making their way toward the convenience store together, the heavy-set guy suddenly stops and quickly lets Unchan know that something has just come up on his end and that he is going to have to take off and head out. Unchan watches him go, but something about the whole thing does not sit right with him at all, and he finds himself standing there wondering what the real reason is behind why the heavy-set guy is so set on seeing him again tomorrow specifically. Unchan then continues on and heads into the convenience store to grab some sodas like he usually does, and when he gets to the counter he nervously tells Yunha that he does not really need anything beyond that. Yunha is not having it though and tells him to let her do something to pay him back, making it clear that she genuinely cannot stand the feeling of being in debt to someone for everything he has already done for her. The big-built guy standing nearby also nudges Unchan and tells him that if there is something on his mind he should just go ahead and ask her already. On his way out of the store, Unchan walks right past a guy standing near the entrance who gives off a seriously intimidating and unsettling vibe just from the look of him. Later on, Yunha makes her way over to the park and sits down to drink her soda, and Unchan shows up and hands her some chips, pointing out that it is really not a good idea to be drinking anything on a completely empty stomach. After everything settles down, the two of them find a spot and sit down together, and Unchan takes the opportunity to ask her whether the man they had just encountered back there was actually her coach. Yunha explains that he was actually the leader of a team called Team Wolf, and that he is the very person who took her under his wing and taught her everything she knows about jiu-jitsu from the very beginning. She also opens up and shares that he has been pushing for her to come back and get back into the game, telling her that it does not have to be about winning or losing at all and that more than anything he just wants her to get back out there and enjoy herself the way she used to. Yunha admits that at the time she had convinced herself that it was smarter to just walk away before things got any worse and before she had to face an even bigger failure down the road, but sitting here now she realizes that what she actually wants more than anything is to go back out there and pour absolutely everything she has into it the same way she always did before. She goes on to say that she would honestly do just about anything to get back on the mat and train alongside her team again, but the problem was that her ego ended up getting completely in the way of all of that. She admits openly that she had started thinking her team simply was not on a high enough level for someone like her, and that she had convinced herself she could reach the very top if she could just get herself into a training environment with world-class fighters instead. Yunha's voice then starts to break as tears begin forming in her eyes, and she says that she now realizes she had been completely wrong about all of it the entire time, and that because of the choices she made back then, she feels like there is simply no way for her to go back anymore. The following day, Unchan gets himself ready and is about to head out the door when his mom stops him and tells him to grab some money off the table and make sure he eats something with Jordan while he is out. Unchan then sees what feels like a good opening and tries to bring up the topic of jiu-jitsu with her once again, but she shuts him down immediately without even letting him finish his sentence, making it very clear that she does not want to hear anything about that subject ever again. She tells him firmly that yoga is more than enough for him and that there is absolutely no reason for him to go off and get into something like that on top of it. Rather than letting it ruin his day, Unchan makes a decision to just push the whole thing out of his head for now so that he can actually go out and enjoy himself without it hanging over him. He then turns around and heads back to meet up with Suyun and her friend since the group had already made plans to hang out together and he does not want to keep them waiting. On the other side of things, Jordan is out and about once again with his mask and hat pulled on to keep himself from being recognized, while the heavy-set guy trails along behind him at a distance, thinking to himself that if he can just manage to catch a good video clip of Jordan to post on his Jiu-jitsu online community, the views are going to go absolutely through the roof. Right at that moment, an intimidating-looking guy comes walking directly toward Jordan and throws a punch straight into his face, which completely catches the heavy-set guy off guard and leaves him frozen in shock. The guy then gets a hold of Jordan and hauls him off to the side where he wastes no time and keeps right on hitting him, while Jordan repeatedly demands to know what on earth he could have possibly done to bring any of this on himself. Since the guy is not saying a single word or giving him any kind of explanation whatsoever, Jordan eventually makes up his mind that he is not just going to stand there and take it, and decides to square up and fight him back head-on. Around the same time all of this is going down, the heavy-set guy also makes it to the location and immediately does what he always does, pulling out his camera and going live to broadcast the whole thing as it happens in real time. It does not take long before the stream starts pulling in viewers from all over, and pretty soon everyone including Suyun and her friend are sitting there watching everything unfold live on their screens. Jordan continues to eat punch after punch from the guy and is getting beaten up in a pretty bad and painful way as the one-sided exchange goes on. Suyun's friend then shoves her phone in front of Unchan's face and shows him the live broadcast so he can see exactly what is happening to Jordan. Things get even worse when the opponent winds up and drives a hard kick right into Jordan's leg, sending him crashing down to the ground. After putting him on the floor, the opponent does not let up even for a second and continues putting the boots to Jordan while he is down. After everything that goes down, they get Jordan over to the hospital as quickly as possible, and while they are there Unchan receives a call from his mother checking in and asking how Jordan is doing. It comes out that 3 full days have already passed since the whole incident went down, and as terrified as he had been in the moment, the heavy-set guy whose name turns out to be Wang had somehow managed to hold himself together long enough to wait until the attacker finally cleared out, and then immediately rushed Jordan to the hospital to get him the help he needed. In the days that follow, pretty much everyone is buzzing with theories and speculation about who could have been behind the attack, but the footage that was captured during the broadcast is simply not clear enough to make out anyone's face well enough to identify them. Shubin goes directly to the teacher and tells her with full confidence that she is certain Jinsu and Jaewee are the ones responsible for what happened to Jordan. The problem, however, is that the evidence just is not there to back any of it up in a concrete way. On top of that, both Jaewee and Jinsu come forward with alibis that place them somewhere else entirely at the time the attack takes place, which makes the whole thing even harder to pin down. That same night, Wang also shows up at the hospital and Unchan takes the opportunity to ask him how things have been going back at school since everything happened. It turns out there has been another pretty significant change made at school, as the administration decides to dissolve the basketball club entirely and replace it with a martial arts club, something that Jaewee had apparently been pushing hard for over a long period of time. On the surface the whole decision is framed in a way that sounds perfectly reasonable and even positive, but underneath all of that polished presentation it is really nothing more than a space where Jaewee can carry out his version of legalized violence without anyone being able to do much about it. The first victim was obviously the one closest to Jordan, Unchan, who was alone all again. One day, Wang tells Unchan that he saw another guy in the shadows watching Jordan get beat up, and he couldn't see his face, but it seemed like Jaewee. He also says that their alibi is complete trash as the rumors of school about Jaewee and Jinsu might be true. Just then, Bruno shows up to the hospital Oswell because of his best friend. Bruno then tells Unchan that Jordan, Sang and himself were friends and always together. Unchan gets surprised to hear Sang's name, so Bruno says that he was in his class and he hated it when Jordan and Sang would whisper in Korean. He also brings up the fact that Sang was the one who taught them how to play video games, and that he used to make them taekbaki from scratch and took the time to teach them how to play basketball too, and on top of all of that he even told them straight up that they were his best friends in the world. Hearing all of this, Unchan finds himself struggling to piece together the details of the last fight he witnessed involving Sang, because the only image that keeps coming back to him is the sight of Sang lying on the ground trembling, and ever since that day something inside Unchan completely locked up to the point where he has not been able to bring himself to hit another person since. Unchan then gathers himself and asks Bruno whatever happened to Sang, and Bruno delivers the answer in the most straightforward and painful way possible, telling him plainly that Sang passed away. Shortly after that, Jordan finally starts coming back around and regains consciousness, and Unchan takes it upon himself to go back to school and let the girls know that according to the doctor Jordan is still going to need several more months of treatment and recovery before he is back to normal. When Unchan swings by to bring some taekbaki over for Jordan, he catches sight of Jaewee walking out of the room with his phone pressed to his ear, and the words coming out of his mouth make it immediately clear that he is telling whoever is on the other end that they should have gone further and beaten Jordan even worse than they did. That single moment hits Unchan like a switch flipping inside him, and he suddenly understands with complete clarity that it is now his turn to stop waiting around for someone else to step in and fix things. He wastes no time heading straight back home where he gathers up every single soda bottle he has been collecting and saving up. He then makes his way back to the convenience store, walks straight up to Yunha, and tells her directly that he wants her to teach him Jiu-jitsu. Yunha then turns to him and asks him straight up what his reason is for wanting to learn, and Unchan tells her simply that he wants to get stronger. Yunha hears that and does not even hesitate before telling him that if that is the only reason he is bringing to the table, then her answer is a flat-out no, explaining that the whole purpose behind martial arts is not just about building up the body but about using that process to nourish and strengthen the mind and soul along with it. Unchan does not back down though and pushes back, telling her that he is completely fed up with getting beaten up day after day like he is helpless and has no way to fight back, and that he is equally tired of forcing himself to look the other way even when he knows without any doubt who is behind everything that has been happening. His voice then starts to crack and tears begin building up as he tells her that jiu-jitsu is supposed to be exactly the kind of thing made for people like him who are not the biggest or the strongest, and that all he wants now is to build himself up enough to actually stand up and protect the people he cares about. That hits Yunha somewhere deep and she finds herself genuinely moved by everything he just said, and she tells him that they are going to sit down and talk about all of it properly tomorrow. Later on, Yunha pulls the massively built guy aside and admits to him that while she did tell Unchan he could come to her and ask for anything, jiu-jitsu lessons were honestly the last thing she was expecting him to show up and ask for. The guy then asks her if she still remembers what the Grand Master used to say back in the day and suggests to her that what is standing in front of them right now could actually turn out to be a real opportunity worth taking seriously. He also points out that Unchan had probably been carrying the desire to finally break out of the shell he had been stuck in ever since the very first day he stepped up in front of her and took that hit without flinching. That same night, Jordan opens up to Unchan and apologizes, admitting that back when Sang used to talk about him all the time, he had always been genuinely curious about who this person was and even found himself feeling a little jealous at times hearing about him. Unchan takes that in and says that even now he still cannot fully piece together what that fight was even really about in the first place, and that the only image his mind ever goes back to is the sight of Sang lying flat on the ground while he himself just stood there completely frozen and terrified out of his mind. He goes on to say that from that day forward he has pretty much been on his own and dealing with everything by himself, and that right around the point where he genuinely felt like he could not keep going on like that any longer, Jordan showed up and things started to feel a little different. Meanwhile, Yunha finds her thoughts drifting back to a conversation she once had with her coach, where he explained that back when he was only a purple belt he had become deeply focused on pushing his physical strength and technique to a higher level, and had started to feel like the team around him simply was not strong enough to get him where he wanted to go. Acting on that feeling, he took every bit of savings he had put together and made the trip all the way out to Brazil, where he drifted from place to place with the sole purpose of tracking down opponents who could actually give him a real challenge. However, the word about what he was doing eventually spread across dojos far and wide, and people started calling him the Korean Mitsuyo, drawing comparisons to the legendary Maeda Mitsuyo and his famous dojo challenges as if he was carrying on that same tradition. The coach then describes how he threw himself into every single match as if his entire life was riding on the outcome, operating under the mindset that every title his opponent held would become his the moment he walked away with the win. Then one day something inside him shifts, and he begins to feel a deep and creeping sense of shame about the person he has been turning into through all of it, eventually coming to the realization that none of what he had been chasing was ever truly about winning in the first place. Yunha then lays out what the physical test is going to look like, letting him know that it is going to cover 4 things in total, which are the burpee test, the pull-up test, the shuttle run, and the squat jump. She also explains that he is going to have a full 5 minutes to work through everything, and that based on how many reps he actually manages to push out within that window, they will have a much clearer picture of where his fitness level currently stands and where the training should start from there. She also makes it clear that if he does not show enough to convince them he has what it takes, they are going to have to seriously reconsider the whole thing, so he needs to leave absolutely nothing in the tank and give it everything he has got. With that said, Unchan's test gets underway and he throws himself into the various exercises one after another while the massively built guy watches from the side and comments to Yunha that she is really pushing him incredibly hard. Yunha responds by saying that what she is actually trying to get a read on more than anything else is just how much determination he is carrying inside him. With 53 seconds still left on the clock, Yunha finds herself quietly observing that his form is actually starting to come together and improve as he goes, and she thinks about how a solid form usually comes from built-up strength, but what she is noticing with this guy is that he is actively getting himself comfortable with the form and using that to pick up his speed at the same time. When the pull-up test portion arrives, Unchan tries to pull off something that would really catch their attention, but he ends up coming short and missing it. Yunha immediately calls him out and asks him flat out whether he is seriously thinking about giving up right now. That snaps something back into place for Unchan and he pushes through, continuing to grind out as many pull-ups as his body will allow him to do before he has nothing left. After all of that is finally done, he finds himself thrown straight into another round of training, and the thought running through his head is that he simply cannot keep up with this, because what he is feeling right now is a whole entirely different and brutal level of pain that he has never experienced before. He thinks that if the yoga lessons were like a calm peaceful lake, this feels like he is in a rapid current. However, he still feels that he can somehow overcome this and become stronger. In a flashback, some kids at school used to make fun of Unchan for doing yoga. So, taking yoga made him an easy target for mockery among his peers. As time goes on and Unchan moves into junior high, what had started out as simple mockery and teasing gradually crosses a line and turns into full-on physical violence directed at him. More than anything, Unchan wants to get stronger and do something about it, but his mother has such a strong hatred toward the idea of him getting into any kind of martial arts that it simply is not an option he can pursue through her. So instead of giving up on the idea entirely, he makes up his mind to work with whatever he actually has access to and build himself up that way. From that point on, pull-ups become a daily non-negotiable part of his routine without a single day skipped, and every rep he knocks out feels like him quietly waiting and preparing for the moment he always knew was eventually going to come. Back to the present, Unchan wraps up his physical test and the numbers he puts up are seriously impressive, finishing with 94 burpees, 73 pull-ups, 69 shuttle runs, and 134 squat jumps to close it all out. Yunha stands there taking it all in and thinks to herself that just getting through the entire test without quitting is already something worth acknowledging on its own, but looking at the actual results she realizes they are genuinely not bad at all, and from a purely physical standpoint she figures he is sitting somewhere close to a semi-pro level. What stands out to her even more than the raw numbers though is the state of his core, particularly the fact that after going through that grueling 5-minute circuit he is still able to hold a steady and controlled plank without falling apart. The massively built guy then tells Unchan to go ahead and take his shirt off, and the moment he does the guy cannot hide his surprise, openly wondering out loud how someone walking around with a body like that could have possibly been getting bullied in the first place. Starting the very next morning, Yunha and Unchan kick off their official training together by heading out and running laps around the entire neighborhood. Unchan is already struggling and barely managing to keep up with her pace by the time they finish, and just when he thinks the hardest part might be behind him, Yunha informs him that what they just did was nothing more than a warm-up and that they still have a full-strength training session ahead of them, which sends him into a minor freakout on the spot. Yunha then turns to him and asks whether he remembers what she told him the day before, and on the back of that she tells him to stop fooling around and get his head in the game so they can move forward with everything. By the time the entire day of training finally wraps up, Unchan is so completely drained and worn out that his body just gives out and he drops straight to the ground without any energy left to hold himself up. Yunha stands over him and tells him to make sure he keeps 3 things in his head at all times going forward. The first is that he needs to run every single day without skipping, and do his strength training every other day on a consistent rotation. The second is that he should be eating as much as his body can take in, and during any time that he is not actively training he should simply be resting and doing nothing else. The third is that no matter what, Sundays are completely off limits for any kind of training, and that rule stands even on days where he personally feels totally fine and ready to go. She finishes by explaining that one of the most common mistakes that beginners make is pushing themselves too hard too fast, and that if he is not giving his body enough food and rest to recover properly, it is simply not going to be able to hold up under the demands of what they are doing. Yunha thinks that it sounds simple but it's harder than he thinks, and she also reminds him not to get selfish and overwork his body because his body is the weapon he is going to use. Later, Unchan's teacher caught him taking nap in classroom, and the teacher is furious at him because he is the first one in his class to fall asleep like that. After class, Unchan tells Wang that he started to train and he can't believe that he is actually training with Yunha. Just then, Suyun and her friend arrive saying he must be exhausted staying with Jordan all those nights. Suyun even gives him a juice bottle. Jae-wee and his fellow thugs then shows up saying Unchan has to fight them today. Suyun's friend completely loses her cool and turns on Jae-wee with everything she has got, demanding to know whether beating up his own classmates on a regular basis was not already bad enough and questioning whether he really feels the need to go ahead and set up what is basically a fight club right there inside the school on top of all of that. She then goes even further and asks him straight to his face whether putting Jordan in the hospital was not enough to satisfy him and whether he seriously feels like he has to keep going and terrorize Unchan as well on top of everything else he has already done. She makes it very clear that she is not fooled for even a single second by that friendly and approachable front he puts on for everyone, telling him point blank that underneath all of it he is nothing more than a gangster hiding behind a nice act with absolutely zero guilt about any of the damage he causes, and that if he is going to hold the title of student president then he needs to actually start behaving like one. The girl then moves to go after Jae-wee as he turns and starts walking away, but without even looking back he throws his arm out and shoves her hard enough to send her stumbling and falling to the ground. Unchan immediately rushes over to her side and asks if she is okay and whether she is hurt. Jae-wee then turns around and coldly tells her that she needs to shut her mouth before he decides to do it for her himself. He then adds on top of that threat that if she ever has the nerve to bring Jordan's name up anywhere around him again, he is going to make sure she ends up lying right beside him in that hospital. The next day, Yunha texts Unchan that it would be better to have a place to train indoors and ask him if he could find a decent one. That day, Unchan helps Jordan shampoo his hairs and Jordan tells him that the doctor said that he will need to stay for a month or two because of his condition and frankly, he will like it better here because of all the care he is getting, so he planned to stay until he is fully recovered. Unchan asks him if his parents are coming soon, but Jordan says that he didn't tell them. Unchan gets surprised and asks him why he would not tell his parents about that, and Jordan says that they are super busy and even if he do tell them, they will force him back to the States. Jordan then says that the food here is good and he have great friends here. Unchan then receives a text from his mother who says that she forgot to turn off the lights at yoga calls and wants him to take care of it. Taking in the situation around him, Unchan comes to the realization that they are going to need a better and more suitable spot to actually get their training done properly. An idea then pops into his head, and he goes ahead and invites Yunha over to the yoga class studio to use that space for their sessions instead. Yunha picks up on the fact that he has been doing yoga regularly and points out that yoga actually lines up really well with jiu-jitsu and turns out to be quite useful and effective for it. Yunha then hands him some clothes to change into and lets him know that since he already does yoga every night, they are going to go ahead and skip the warm-up portion and jump straight into things. While Unchan is looking over the belt she handed him, he takes note of the worn-down and well-used condition it is in and thinks to himself that Yunha must have put in an enormous amount of time and hard work training over the years for it to look the way it does. Once he gets changed and comes back, Yunha starts walking him through the background of the art and explains that back in its earlier days jiu-jitsu did actually include some striking as part of the style, but that the modern version of jiu-jitsu practice today is focused entirely on ground technique without any of that. Even with that shift though, she makes it clear that jiu-jitsu is still widely regarded as one of the single most effective fighting styles anywhere in the world. She then breaks down the core components for him, explaining that jiu-jitsu is built around the guard and the guard pass, that an escape is what happens when he manages to work his way out of a bad and dangerous position, and that a sweep is when he successfully shifts and flips his position around during a match. Yunha also brings up submissions and goes over the different types of locks that fall under that category, and then lays out the training schedule by explaining that they are going to be doing GI training 3 times a week and no GI training 2 times a week and that this is how things are going to run until his friend is fully recovered and back on his feet. It turns out that GI Jiu-jitsu, which is the version practiced while wearing the traditional uniform, opens up a much wider variety of moves and techniques compared to the other style. No GI Jiu-jitsu on the other hand is practiced without the uniform and comes with a noticeably smaller range of available moves as a result. A lot of people out there tend to hold the opinion that GI is the less practical of the two when it comes to real-world situations, but Yunha makes it clear that she does not see it that way at all. The way she breaks it down is that while no GI is really effective for developing explosive movement and teaching someone how to handle and push through intense pressure in the moment, GI is what allows a person to slow things down and truly absorb the finer and more subtle details behind how to properly dominate and control an opponent. When it comes down to it, her view is that learning from both styles together is simply the best possible approach anyone can take. Yunha then shifts the conversation and tells Unchan that before anything else he needs to wrap his head around 2 foundational concepts, which are the guard and the guard pass. She explains that no matter whether he ends up on top of his opponent or flat on his back, the moment the ground game begins everything that happens from that point forward becomes a back-and-forth battle between the guard and the guard pass. Yunha then decides that talking about it is only going to go so far and that it is time to actually show him how it works in a practical setting, so she tells him to get up on his feet. Shortly after that, Yunha shoots in and uses a double leg takedown to bring Unchan down to the ground, and while she is doing it she starts walking him through exactly what is happening and what it all means. She explains that the moment a fight transitions to the ground, whoever ends up on the bottom is considered to be in the guard position while the person on top holds the top position. With that in mind, she tells him that his entire job as the person sitting in the guard position is to either find a way to sweep his opponent and flip things around or go hunting for a submission before the person on top can do any real damage. Her job on the other hand is to break through his guard completely, and once she manages to take control of his upper body from the side, she tells him that there are actually plenty of different ways she can go from there to finish things off. After laying all of that out, she makes it clear that his one and only priority right now is to do absolutely whatever it takes to fight his way back into the guard position and get himself back to somewhere safe. Yunha then drives her knee in and plants it in a way that leaves Unchan completely pinned down without being able to shift even a single inch in any direction. She then looks down at him and tells him flat out that if he does not figure out something to do right now, he is going to get completely smashed where he is. She follows that up by telling him to stop all the pointless squirming and instead focus on actually trying to throw her off balance. Unchan, however, is already thinking 2 steps ahead in his own head, coming to the conclusion that continuing to struggle the way he is going is only going to drain his energy faster, and deciding instead that he is going to try to make a calculated move and go for one of her arms. He then grabs her arm and swings her to the other side, wondering if it really worked. Yunha then grabs him and says that just because she is on the ground, doesn't mean that he is ahead in Jiu-jitsu. She then uses scissor sweep technique to sweep and regain a good position again. To wrap things up, Yunha finishes it all off by locking in a mount armbar on Unchan and putting him in a position he has no way out of. It has only been 5 minutes since they started sparring, but the intensity of what just happened is on a completely different level compared to anything else, making the entire morning training session they had done earlier feel like an easy and relaxed warm-up by comparison. Yunha then takes a moment to break down what just went down, telling him that it would have been a seriously difficult task for her to take control the way she did if he had just kept his guard up and held his position properly. On the flip side of that though, she explains that if she had failed to get through the guard pass when she went for it, she would have left herself wide open and vulnerable to either a sweep or a submission coming right back at her. She also points out that whenever someone manages to secure the better position over their opponent, that opponent is going to be forced to burn through roughly twice the amount of energy just trying to deal with it and fight their way out. After all of that, Unchan and Yunha keep right on going and push through several more rounds of practice together, eventually working through a total of 9 full sparring rounds that add up to 59 submissions by the time everything is said and done. That night when Unchan finally gets back home, he barely has enough left in him to do anything at all and falls asleep almost the moment he gets the chance. Unchan's mother notices he is not coming by and decides to give Jordan a call to let him know, but it turns out Jordan has already knocked out and fallen asleep as well. Unchan's mother stands there thinking to herself that Unchan has seemed noticeably more energetic and alive lately and finds herself wondering quietly whether his new friend might have something to do with that change in him. Starting the very next morning, Unchan gets right back into the grind by dragging himself out of bed early and heading out for his warm-up run to kick things off. As all of this is going on, Yunha finds herself thinking back to when she was first getting started with her own training, and how the third day in particular hit her harder than anything else because there was simply no way her body was going to adjust and get comfortable with training that intense in such a short stretch of time. Whenever the thought of just quitting and walking away started creeping into her head, her master had 2 specific things he would do to pull her back from that edge and get her focused again. The first was sitting her down and reminding her of the reason she had decided to start all of this in the first place and what she was really working toward. The second was making sure there was always someone in her corner cheering her on at the top of their lungs without holding anything back. Everyone on the team made a point of lifting each other up during the moments that felt the most impossible, and the master's roar in particular was something that gave her just enough of a push to keep going every single time she found herself right on the edge of giving up completely. On a lighter note, whenever Unchan swings by to visit Jordan during his recovery, Jordan has a habit of dozing off and falling asleep right on top of him, which gets on Unchan's nerves pretty fast every single time it happens. Unchan asks him if there is anything he can do to help him out or keep him occupied, but Jordan waves it off and says that there is absolutely no way he is wasting time sleeping on a day as beautiful as this one, pointing out that there are actual sakura trees right outside the window putting on a show. Some time passes and Jordan eventually makes the decision to come back to school, showing up in a wheelchair, and the moment he rolls through the door a crowd of girls immediately surrounds him and starts asking whether he is feeling any better and how he has been holding up. Meanwhile, Things at the school entrance are getting chaotic in a completely different way as students start showing up one after another with all kinds of dress code violations, whether it is missing name tags or girls rocking skirts that are way shorter than what the school policy allows. One of the teachers stationed at the gate tries to put his foot down and tells the girls that their skirts are simply too short to be within the rules, but instead of taking the correction, the girls immediately flip it around and start accusing him of standing there staring at their legs, which completely throws him off and leaves him with nowhere to go in the argument. The whole situation makes it pretty clear that the faculty has basically lost any real grip of authority they once had over the student body, and Jae ends up being the one to step in and calmly tell the girls that it would probably be a good idea to wear something a little longer out of respect for the school policy. Then out of nowhere the girls completely erupt into screaming the moment they spot Jordan making his way through, having just realized that he is actually back. Jae freezes when he sees this and the shock hits him hard, the thought running through his head being that putting Jordan in the hospital apparently was not enough to keep him down and out of the picture. The anger builds up fast inside him and he thinks to himself that once he gets the authority and power he is working toward, he is going to come back around and make sure Jordan pays for it all over again. Later, the school holds a staff meeting in which one of the teachers says that they are having some trouble with regards to the school dress code. One of the teacher mentions that no one even listens to them anymore, and even if they do they ignore them. The female teacher also adds up that it's hard for her to even say a word as she is really afraid of being assaulted by these kids. The other teacher then says that he misses the old days because now with the student record screening, there's too much work to do, and they just don't have the time to discipline these students. Right at that moment, the principal walks in with Jae right by his side and lets everyone know that Jae has something important he wants to bring to the class. Jae steps forward and addresses everyone in his student body president role, telling them that he is there to give them some direction and clarity on how student discipline is going to be handled moving forward from this point on. He then goes into detail about something called comprehensive student record screening, laying out that it is an entirely new screening process that has completely shifted and changed the way college admissions works. He explains that beyond just looking at SAT scores like things used to be done, students are now going to be evaluated and screened based on their overall record across every single aspect of their school activities and involvement. Because of how much this shift adds to the workload, the teachers find themselves completely buried and swamped with a mountain of extra responsibilities on top of everything they were already dealing with. One of the teachers pushes back a little and asks him directly how exactly he is planning to go through and review every single student across the entire school without it becoming completely unmanageable. Jae has an answer ready and explains that he is going to assign 2 students in each class to take on the role of monitoring their fellow classmates, and that those students will then feed the teachers all the details and information about things that might have otherwise slipped under the radar and gone unnoticed. As it turns out, looking back at Jae's childhood, pretty much every photo he has from those early years has his dad in it right there beside him. His mom was always buried in her work and never really around, so his dad made the decision to quit his job entirely and take on the responsibility of raising Jae pretty much on his own. For Jae, dinner gatherings growing up meant sitting around a table with his mom's business friends and associates, which was never exactly a comfortable or enjoyable situation for his dad to be put in time after time. During those dinners, Jae's mom had a habit of taking shots at his dad right there in front of everyone, pointing out how he always managed to fumble and ruin every single business opportunity that ever came his way, and the people around the table would join in and laugh along, turning his dad into the butt of the joke every time. Not long after all of that, Jae's dad simply disappears from the picture, and even now Jae finds it embarrassing and uncomfortable to talk about what his dad actually does for a living since he cannot seem to keep even the smallest and most basic business venture going successfully. All of those years of watching his father get torn down and humiliated quietly planted something dark and ugly deep inside Jae, and that thing had been slowly waking up and growing stronger with every passing year. Back to the present, Jae sits there barely able to contain his impatience, counting down and waiting for the new student order he has been working toward to finally fall into place so that he can get his revenge on everyone who has been standing in his way. Later that same night, Wang and Unchan hang out together in Jordan's hospital room where the 3 of them eat together and get into some kind of game to pass the time. After Wang and Unchan end up on the losing end of the game, the 2 of them head out together to grab something from outside. On the way, Wang turns to Unchan and asks him how the very first day of training went for him, and right away Unchan picks up on the fact that this is probably the real reason Wang had asked him to come along in the first place. Wang presses a little further and asks him to get into the specifics, wanting to know exactly what skills Yunha had actually taught him during the session. Unchan tells him that when it comes down to it, all they really covered was the guard and the setup, which does not sound like much on the surface. The story then flashes back to Monday, where Yunha is explaining to Unchan that there are actually a whole lot of different guard plays available to him and plenty of options he can work with, but before any of that matters he needs to get the guard setup down first so that he can put himself in the right position to make the correct moves when the moment calls for it. She then drops down to the ground and grabs onto him, telling him that what he needs to work on setting up right now is something called the spider guard. She then goes ahead and demonstrates by executing a spider guard sweep that sends Unchan straight to the ground without much resistance at all. She also explains that the lesson for the day is going to be focused on the closed guard setup specifically, and that the technique involves wrapping his legs around his opponent and using that to control and limit what they are able to do. She then gets into a position and tells him to hold this position for more than 1 minute. She also says that he has to prevent the other person from escaping, and if he can do that, she will show him a real technique. Back in present, Unchan tells Wang that he didn't pull it off and they only sparred with positioning, but he couldn't get past the 10-second mark. Wang tells him that the fact that he managed to set up a guard against Master Yunha at all is still pretty remarkable on its own, because the average person out there would not even come anywhere close to pulling off what he did in that situation. Wang then asks him to walk him through everything that went down during training that day, and Unchan goes ahead and breaks it all down for him from start to finish. Back when they were at the yoga center, Yunha had made it crystal clear to him that if someone does not have a solid ground game backing them up in jiu-jitsu, then the whole thing falls apart and becomes essentially worthless. Because of that, she lays out that Tuesdays and Thursdays are going to be dedicated entirely to ground game lessons covering takedowns and guard passing so that he can start building that foundation properly. Yunha then resets herself back into her basic stance and starts walking him through the details, telling him that the first thing he needs to do is drop his posture lower and make sure he is keeping his armpits closed tight so that his opponent cannot get their arms in and dig underneath him. After that she closes the distance between them and grabs him around the waist, explaining that the natural and instinctive reaction from the other person at that point is going to be to reach up and grab around his neck in response. She then shoots down, snatches both of his legs out from under him, and drives him into the floor, telling him that what he just experienced is called the two-leg takedown. With that demonstration done, it is now Unchan's turn to give it a shot himself, and the moment he moves in and tries to close the distance he ends up crashing face first straight into Yunha's chest. The following day, everyone makes their way into school as usual, and Unchan walks in and almost immediately notices one of the students ahead of him not wearing a tie. The thought briefly crosses his mind that it would probably be pretty easy to just slip through without wearing one and not get caught, but another guy standing nearby quickly shuts that idea down and says that the student order is absolutely not going to let something like that slide no matter what. Sure enough, right at that moment someone calls the student out loud for the dress code violation, and when everyone turns around to see what is going on, the sight that greets them is enough to leave the whole crowd completely stunned, as student council members are already in the middle of physically beating students as a form of punishment for not having their dress code in proper order. Later during the school assembly, the principal steps up and addresses everyone, telling the student body that the entire purpose of being in this place is to learn discipline and develop respect for others, but that in the current state of things the teachers have become too afraid and too worn down to actually instill those values in students the way they are supposed to. He then announces that it is for exactly that reason that he has gone ahead and established what he is calling the student order, with the stated goal of bringing real discipline back to the school once and for all. As it turns out, the very first person to fall victim to the student order is a student named Hoyan, who had already been held back and forced to repeat his junior year once before and is carrying a pretty serious chip on his shoulder about the whole situation. When Hoyan is sitting in class, he makes it obvious from the start that he has zero intention of paying attention to anything the teacher is saying, and the attitude he carries throughout the whole thing comes across as flat-out disrespectful to everyone in the room. The teacher shouts at him, asking if he wants to spend another year as a junior. Hoyan completely loses it and slams his desk hard onto the ground before storming straight out of the class without looking back at anyone. Not long after that, a clip of Hoyan's sparring session starts spreading across every corner of the school's social media, and it is right around that moment that the entire student body comes to the collective realization that the student order is not just a suggestion but is now essentially the law of the school. Later during the school day, Jae walks up to Unchan and reaches over to straighten out his tie, casually telling him that he should pass the message along to Jordan about the new rules that are now in place since nobody wants to see him catching trouble over something as small as a crooked tie. When break rolls around, Wang and Unchan sit together, both completely unable to wrap their heads around the fact that the entire atmosphere and culture of the school has shifted this dramatically in the span of just a single day. Unchan then lets his frustration spill out and tells Wang that he still has not been able to figure out how to get a proper grab on Yunha, and it is all because of what went down during their session the day before. In that session, Yunha had made it clear to him that just because he manages to lock his legs around his opponent does not mean the job is anywhere close to done, and she tells him that he needs to be using both of his hands actively to defend against the guard pass at the same time. Yunha then moves in close and grabs him by the cheeks, pointing out plainly that she is his teacher and that he really should not be looking at her the way he is looking at her right now. The following day, the Korean Jiu-Jitsu Championship is being broadcast live, and right in the middle of everything a reporter pulls Huang aside and sits down with her for an interview. The reporter opens things up by congratulating her on pulling off her second sweep and asks her to share what it feels like to have gone through the entire tournament completely undefeated without giving up a single point along the way. Huang keeps things humble and says that she honestly just considers herself lucky, and the reporter then brings up her team Black Octopus and what that association means to her. The reporter follows that up by asking whether she has any plans to rejoin the team going forward, and Huang responds by saying that after her last contest coming up in December, she is planning to head back to the States and leave things there for now. The reporter asks her whether there is any particular opponent who has ever given her a genuinely hard time out on the mat, and whether there is someone she has been wanting to get another shot at. Huang takes a moment and then opens up, explaining that before she ever got into jiu-jitsu she came from a wrestling background, and that because of that she had never once found herself on her back during a match until the final bout of her very first tournament, where she ended up giving up 2 points off a takedown that she had not seen coming. It becomes clear pretty quickly that the person she is talking about without saying the name directly is none other than Yunha, and she describes how Yunha had come at her with such raw intensity and tenacity before driving through with a guard pass that hit like an absolute storm. Huang thinks that it felt like as if she was fighting against a beast. The reporter quickly figures out that she is talking about Yunha and says that she haven't seen her around after that match. However, Huang says that they might be able to see her again soon. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Unchan finds himself in the middle of a sparring match against one of the bullies. As the match is going on, Unchan's mind drifts to something he has been thinking about, which is how anyone can watch a technique and copy the basic shape of it, and how Yunha had told him straight up that it takes a serious amount of sparring time and real fight experience before a technique stops being something you are just mimicking and actually becomes something that belongs to you, and that is the point where it truly feels like a natural part of who you are. The match kicks off with the bully coming straight at Unchan and throwing punches at him one after another, and then at one point Unchan manages to read one of the incoming blows just right and slips out of the way in time, which clearly catches the bully off guard and throws him off for a moment. Unchan then pulls Yunha's words back to the front of his mind and starts putting them into action, dropping his posture down lower and clamping his armpits shut tight to cut off his opponent's ability to dig underneath him the way Yunha had taught him. He then starts moving in toward his opponent with the intention of grabbing him around the waist, but something causes him to hesitate, and he stops himself right in the middle of the approach before he can complete the move. The bully takes full advantage of that moment of hesitation and drives a punch straight into Unchan's face without any resistance. After putting him down, the bully climbs on top of him and starts raining punches down at him from above, but then Unchan reacts and throws his legs up, locking them around the bully and cutting off his ability to keep attacking freely. After everything plays out, the bully finishes beating Unchan up and walks away from the area without looking back, saying that he is such a pathetic loser who had every bit of that beating coming to him. Wang immediately rushes over to where Unchan is and checks on him, but what he finds when he gets there stops him in his tracks because instead of finding Unchan in pain and miserable, he is actually sitting there with a smile on his face. Wang looks at him like he might be losing it and asks if he needs to get checked out by a doctor, but Unchan is barely even paying attention to what Wang is saying because his mind is completely locked in on replaying every detail of the fight that just happened. During the fight, the bully had kept coming at him over and over again with punch after punch without letting up. In the middle of all of that, Unchan had thrown his legs up and wrapped them around the bully, and what he noticed in that moment was that the bully started wobbling and losing his stability just from a relatively light squeeze of his legs around him. Then when the bully wound up and tried to throw another punch at him, Unchan used his hands to lock him up and cut the attack off before it could land cleanly. His mind then drifts back to a moment during training when he had been doing the exact same thing with Yunha, and right in the middle of it the clock had run out on them. Yunha had told him afterward that holding on and just clinging to his opponent the way he was doing was not going to get him anywhere useful, and that if she were in his position she would be patient and wait for her opponent to burn through all their energy and gas out completely before making a move. She had also used that moment to reinforce the bigger point she had been trying to get across, which is that this is exactly why he needs to be building up his techniques, because all that guarding and trapping he is doing is really just the setup that puts him in position to actually execute the technique when the right moment arrives. Yunha then explains that Jiu-jitsu gets really competitive here, and it's guard set up and sweep versus guard break and pass. After the practice session, both of them walks outside and Unchan thinks that she's awful quite compared to when she teaches. Unchan also thinks that he can't wait till tomorrow and wonders if he should ask her how to gap the distance. Yunha then notices him staring at her and asks if he is hungry. Just then, Wang shows up out of nowhere like a freak with chicken and asks if they are hungry. After that, they sit at the nearby park to eat together. Yunha turns to Unchan and asks him straight up why the school faculty is not stepping in and doing anything about the situation, especially given that his whole reason for being there is to learn how to protect his friend. She also makes it clear that she gets the picture of just how out of control things have gotten at his school, with these bullies sitting around and waiting for the right moment to go after his friend again. Unchan explains that the teachers are actually wrapped up in the whole thing themselves, and that what everyone is calling the student order has basically turned into a system where the troublemakers and bullies are being funneled straight into the school's martial arts club and then sent out to beat students up under the cover of enforcing discipline. He goes on to tell her that Jae-wee has essentially taken school punishment into his own hands and turned it into something he personally controls, and that the students who fall in line and show Jae-wee the respect he demands are simply left alone and do not have to worry about anything coming their way. Yunha then asks whether going to the police is an option worth considering, but Unchan shakes his head and explains that because everything is technically happening under the umbrella of a school club activity, there is not really a whole lot that the police can actually do about it when it is framed that way. Unchan then shrugs it off and tells her that as far as he is concerned it is actually working out fine for him, pointing out that she herself had told him that jiu-jitsu demands a whole lot of real fight experience to develop properly, and this is exactly what he is getting. Yunha follows that up by telling him that there is absolutely no reason to be in a rush about any of it because he is going to get to where he needs to be when the time is right. Yunha then finds herself thinking quietly about the fact that despite all the abuse and nonsense Unchan has to deal with at school on a daily basis, he is somehow managing to flip all of that and use it as a chance to sharpen and develop his skills in a real setting. She also finds herself thinking about how jiu-jitsu and any other grappling-based sport is genuinely not the kind of thing that can be mastered in a short window of time no matter how hard someone pushes, but for whatever reason she cannot shake the feeling that this particular guy is different and that she has real and genuine hope for where he could end up. Yunha then lets him know that before they dive into learning any new techniques, she has a specific task she wants him to take on first. Snapping back to the present, Unchan is getting himself ready for school from inside Jordan's hospital room where he has apparently been crashing. Jordan is already in a bad mood about it and calls him out for always showing up late at night and then slipping out again before the sun even comes up and tells him flat out that he is convinced Unchan is hiding something from him and that the whole situation feels off. Rather than saying anything back or trying to explain himself, Unchan simply takes off and runs straight out the door toward school without addressing it at all. When he arrives at school, he walks through and takes in the atmosphere around him, thinking to himself that everything about this place has shifted and changed since the student order came into effect, and that he honestly is not sure yet whether any of those changes are actually for the better. One of the students happens to have his tie stuffed away in his pocket instead of wearing it properly around his neck, and the moment the student council picks up on it they immediately close in and make it clear they are going to make an example out of him without any hesitation. Later on when the school assembly gets underway, the principal makes his way to the front and stands before the entire student body to present Jae-wee with a formal award, holding him up in front of everyone as the person responsible for supposedly restoring order and discipline back to the school. Back in class afterward, Jae-wee's own friends sit there barely able to believe that he actually walked away with an award on top of everything else, while the rest of the students in the room are clearly not sharing in that excitement and are sitting with visible frustration written all over their faces. Unchan starts dozing off at his desk during class, and Suyun notices and reaches over to wake him up, sliding a soda over to him to help him get through it. Before Unchan even gets a proper chance to enjoy it though, Jae-wee reaches over and swipes the soda right out of his hands, takes a sip, makes a point of saying out loud that it tastes absolutely disgusting, and then drops it on the floor like it means nothing. Without making a big scene about it, Unchan calmly gets up from his seat, walks over to where the soda landed, picks it up off the floor, and takes a slow deliberate sip from it while Jae-wee watches. Jae-wee does not take kindly to that at all and starts moving directly toward Unchan with clear intent, and the moment Unchan sees him coming his mind immediately starts calculating, and the thought that flashes through his head is that this might actually be the perfect moment to go for the two-leg tackle. Unchan's mind starts drifting and he finds himself imagining the moment where he shoots in and goes for a two-leg tackle on Jae-wee. But before that thought can go anywhere Jae-wee reaches out and grabs him by the collar and demands that he answer him right now. Unchan's mind goes completely blank in that moment, and all he can think about is how it feels like something has crawled inside him and taken over, leaving him frozen and unable to do anything. He knows he needs to say something, anything at all, because the thought running through his head is that if he does not find the words fast, then things are going to get very bad for him. Right at that tense moment, another senior suddenly storms in looking absolutely furious and gets right in Jaewee's face, demanding to know whether he seriously thinks he can just go around beating up seniors without any consequences. The senior winds up and tries to throw a punch at Jaewee, but Jinsu steps in immediately and cuts it off, telling him firmly that this is not the right place to be doing any of this. After class wraps up, Unchan heads outside and stands there wrestling with his thoughts, unable to stop thinking about how he let Suyun down and feeling like the most worthless friend anyone could possibly have. He also cannot get the image out of his head of Jaewee grabbing him by the collar and how he just stood there completely paralyzed by fear without doing a single thing about it. He keeps splashing cold water on his face over and over again, staring ahead and genuinely questioning whether he is ever going to be capable of actually standing up and protecting Jordan when the moment comes and Jaewee decides to make his move. Right at that moment, Wang comes rushing over and lets Unchan know that Jaewee and the rest of his crew are already over there, but Unchan just shrugs it off and says that he does not particularly care about that right now. Wang is not having any of that though and immediately gets fired up, turning on Unchan and demanding to know what happened to all that talk he had been doing about wanting to protect his closest friend. Wang pushes further and tells him that if protecting Jordan is genuinely something he is serious about, then he needs to be paying close attention and breaking down every single move that Jaewee makes whenever he fights, because that information is going to matter when it counts. After that conversation, the two of them quietly make their way over to the spot where Jaewee is known to take students to bully them, making sure to stay out of sight the whole time. Wang has his camera ready and already has a clear plan in his head about what he wants to get out of being there. He tells Unchan that they need to make the most of this opportunity by getting the whole thing on camera so that they can sit down afterward and go through the footage carefully to pick apart and analyze the way Jaewee moves and fights. With everything set up and ready to go, Jaewee and one of the seniors step into the ring and the two of them start going head-to-head against each other. Wang and Unchan manage to slip through and find themselves a spot to sit where they can watch everything without drawing attention, but the moment they settle in they notice a boy with purple hair already sitting right beside them completely knocked out and sleeping like nothing is going on. The match keeps going with Sechel throwing punch after punch at Jaewee, and Wang watches closely and starts to figure out that Sechel probably has some kind of boxing background based on the way he is moving and throwing his shots. Unchan on the other hand is picking up on something that feels off about the whole situation, and the thought forming in his head is that Jaewee is deliberately holding back and not fighting back on purpose for some reason. Then, something shifts in Jaewee and he suddenly gets dead serious, loading up and driving a clean and powerful punch straight into Sechel's chin that snaps his head back. From that point on Jaewee does not let up for even a second and keeps right on hitting Sechel over and over again while Sechel is already begging him to stop and quit going after him. After Sechel has been thoroughly beaten down, his friends finally decide to step in and come to his rescue, and in the chaos of that they end up shoving Unchan back and out of the way. Jaewee then turns and calls out to Jinsu to get in there and back him up so they can handle everything together. Later, Wang tells Unchan that Conor McGregor is one of the most famous MMA fighters in the history of UFC, and he is also the top-paid fighter in the sport. He became the featherweight champion by knocking out Jose Aldo, the longest title holder in the UFC, in just 13 seconds. After that, he won the lightweight championship, making him the first two-weight class champion in UFC history. All taught he is known for his superior fighting skills, his trash talk is what truly made him the main attraction. Wang also says that Jose Aldo is known to be a stone-cold killer, but he thinks Conor's taunting got to his head. Wang then gets to the point he has actually been building toward the whole time and explains that the reason he brought up Conor in the first place is because he noticed a pretty clear resemblance between the way Conor operates and the way Jaewee fights. Wang then pulls up the recording he captured of the fight earlier and walks Unchan through it, pointing out how easy it is to see when you watch it back that Jaewee is spending a significant chunk of the fight covering up and taking hits without actually fighting back, and that the person on the other end who is throwing all those punches non-stop is going to inevitably run out of gas from all that output. He breaks it down further and explains that while it might look at first glance like the senior has the clear upper hand in the exchange, if they look a little more carefully at what is actually happening they can see that by a certain point the senior is already completely gassed out and running on empty. Wang wraps up his analysis by concluding that what Jaewee is really doing comes down to a calculated tactic of getting his opponent fired up and emotional, and then simply waiting with patience for them to open themselves up and leave a gap he can exploit. After taking all of that in, Unchan's mind shifts to the obstacle that is standing between him and Jaewee, and he realizes that before he can even think about getting to Jaewee he is going to have to find a way through Jinsu first. The thought gets even heavier when he thinks back to the fight earlier where Jinsu stepped into the ring and dismantled every single student he went up against without breaking a sweat or showing any signs of being pushed, which genuinely catches Unchan off guard with just how effortless it all looked. That night, Unchan heads back to his jiu-jitsu training session with Yunha and gets right back into the grind as usual. Before they get into the training session, Unchan stops and asks her a question that has clearly been sitting on his mind, wanting to know whether the fear he feels is something that eventually goes away once he gets as strong as she is. Yunha looks at him for a moment and tells him honestly that she is not quite sure what he is referring to. Unchan then opens up and explains that it has to do with Jaewee and that when Jaewee was simply walking toward him the other day he found himself completely frozen and unable to move a single inch no matter how hard he tried. Yunha takes that in and tells him straight that she has never actually walked around thinking of herself as some kind of strong and fearless person, and that she gets scared too just like anyone else does. She tells him that when it comes down to it, there are really only two ways to deal with it, and that is either getting used to the feeling over time or learning to put your trust in the amount of effort and work you have already put into yourself. Yunha then brings up the fact that something happened to her a while back that changed everything for her. She tells him that she had never been beaten the way she was beaten during that incident, not once in her entire life before that moment, and that she was so shaken and terrified afterward that the thought of getting revenge did not even enter her mind. However, that same experience ended up being the very thing that pushed her toward jiu-jitsu in the first place and set everything in motion. She explains that for a long time after that she lived with a constant anxiety about the possibility of running into those people again out on the street, but rather than letting that fear break her down it ended up becoming the fuel that drove her to push harder and get better with every single day that passed, and it is exactly why she made the choice to spar against men to keep testing and pushing herself. On top of all of that, Yunha leaves Unchan with one final thing to hold on to, telling him not to waste his energy trying to beat the fear or make it disappear, but instead to take it and use it as motivation every time he steps into training, because one day down the road he is going to come to understand what fear is really made of. The next day, after school, Unchan is on the bus on his way to home thinking that the task was to find out 3 situations that he could work on while sparring with the bullies. Unchan sparred twice after the task was given. During the second time, Unchan managed to beat up the bully quite badly. He happened to lock his opponent just like he promised, which makes the bully and he throws away his gloves, thinking to fight barehanded. The bully's friend starts manipulating him that Unchan is embarrassing him big time, and how he need to show them something. Upon hearing that, the bully runs straight towards Unchan and kicks him straight in the face. He then tries to punch him in the face, but Unchan dodges that and grabs him by his waist. At that moment, Jaewee shows up, asks what's going on there. The bully tells him that they were sparring, and Unchan was just pissing him off. Jaewee suddenly starts hitting him repeatedly in the face several times in a row, and while he is doing it he reminds them that he already made it clear that the student order has only just gotten started and they are nowhere near done with it yet. He then catches himself and asks out loud where his gloves are, pointing out that without them someone could easily turn around and report him for straight-up assault if things go sideways. Later that same night, Unchan makes the decision to start recording his training sessions with Yunha so that he can go back and study the footage on his own time afterward and pick up on things he might have missed in the moment. Yunha asks him whether he managed to finish the task she had given him, and he confirms that he did, telling her that he got 2 sparring sessions in and came away with a few things that he thinks are genuinely worth paying attention to and taking note of. He breaks it down for her, explaining that getting a takedown turned out to be a lot harder than expected because of how much the distance between him and his opponent kept changing and shifting throughout the exchange. On top of that, the guy he was going up against had absolutely no idea what a guard pass even was, which created its own set of challenges in terms of being able to apply what he had been learning in a real setting. As the last thing he brings up, Unchan tells her that during the fight he kept finding himself wanting to get up and throw strikes at his opponent even while he had him locked up in his guard. Yunha hears that and tells him that is actually not a bad instinct at all, and that they can take that specific situation and work on developing it properly during their no-GI sessions going forward. Yunha then goes on to point out that when it comes to jiu-jitsu there are literally hundreds of different techniques available to him on the ground, but that does not mean he needs to go out and learn every single one of them to be effective. What actually matters, she explains, is that he develops the understanding of which techniques fit which situations best, because pulling off a technique successfully is not just about knowing how to do it but involves a never-ending process of reading ahead, anticipating what is coming, and using deception to set things up in his favor. Yunha also tells him that when the right moment does finally present itself in a real situation, He needs to be ready to recognize it immediately and seize that window to go for the finish without hesitating, and that this is the exact reason why they have been putting so much of their focus on the closed guard throughout their sessions, so that he can start developing a feel and a sense for what is happening and what his options are when he finds himself in that position. To close things out, Yunha lets him know that the lesson for today is going to be centered around submission and sweep, and she finishes by asking him whether he has any idea what a kimura is. As it turns out, Masahiko Kimura was one of the greatest judo masters to ever come out of Japan, and he is widely regarded as the absolute best the sport had to offer during the entire decade of the 1950s. Back in 1951, he went up against Helio Gracie in a legendary match and came away with the victory by finishing him with a technique called the Udgaram. As a way of honoring and showing respect to Masahiko Kimura and what he accomplished, the entire Jiu-jitsu world made the collective decision to retire the name Udgaram and rename the technique the Kimura in his honor, and that is the name it carries to this day. After going through all of that background, Yunha and Unchan get themselves ready and move into the actual practice portion of the session. She steps in and grabs him around the waist, and begins walking him through the technique step by step, telling him that the first thing he needs to learn is how to grab onto his opponent's wrist while he is in the closed guard position, then unlock his guard and bring both of his feet down flat onto the ground. From there, he needs to move quickly and get himself up while grabbing his opponent's arm and then reaching over to grab his own wrist to lock in what is known as the Kimura grip. After securing that, he closes his guard back up and applies a slight twist to his opponent's arm to finish the technique off completely. The next move she introduces him to is a sweep that is designed to work directly off the Kimura setup, and the starting point for it is the same as before where he grabs his opponent's wrist, but this time he pulls the opponent's hand in tight and close to his own body while his other hand comes down and plants itself firmly on the floor behind him. Using Kimura sweep technique, she manages to roll him over on the ground and says that now it's his turn. The Kimura technique works by grabbing the opponent's wrist in closed guard position and wrapping around left arm and grabbing the right wrist. Lastly, they have to lock their guard and instead of twisting, they have to pull opponent's arm towards their own body. For the Kimura sweep, firstly they have to grab the opponent's arm and pull in with one arm and put the other arm against the floor. Then, pushing the opponent with their pelvis to get up and keeping their balance to avoid getting sweeped. Right before wrapping things up, Yunha stops and leaves him with something important to think about, telling him that a technique is straightforward enough to pick up and copy when you are just going through the motions during a regular practice session. However, she follows that up by explaining that when it actually comes time to pull that same technique out in a real combat situation, the only way it ever truly becomes his is by sparring with it over and over again until it stops feeling like something he is trying to remember and starts feeling like a natural extension of how he moves. She also tells him to think of everything they covered today as a basic set of guidelines rather than a rigid set of rules, because the way a technique gets applied can and will change depending on factors like how big his opponent is. She also says that what stays consistent no matter what, though, she makes clear, is the point at which he commits and goes for the technique, and she emphasizes that it is always going to be on him to make the call about whether to apply it as taught or adjust it to fit what is in front of him. She then asks whether he still remembers the task she gave him earlier, and tells him that between now and their next session he should be actively thinking about how he can take what he learned today and find ways to connect it to the situations that came up during that task. Back to the present, Unchan is out pushing through his morning run, and the thought fueling every stride is that the next time he comes face to face with that bully, he is going to be ready for it in a way he simply was not before. After getting through the physical training portion of the session, they move into drills to sharpen and reinforce the techniques they have been working on, and Yunha surprises him by pulling out a mouthpiece and handing it over to him as a gift, telling him that he has earned it by making it this far without quitting. With that, the time for a rematch between Unchan and the bully finally arrives. 30 minutes ago, the teacher calls over Jiujitsu saying he need to finish up some paperwork and asks him to take over gym class for a bit. Later, Jiujitsu tells the student that he has been appointed to lead the gym class until the teacher gets back, and they are going to have some activities with martial arts club. One of the students calls out saying he must be legalizing bully club, but his friend stops him. Jiujitsu then steps up and makes the announcement to everyone that there is going to be a match between Unchan and Yang. Suyun's friend immediately asks him if he has completely lost his mind, wanting to know why the two of them are being put against each other when the teacher had specifically told everyone to focus on working through their physical tests. The girl does not get much further with her argument though, because she gets kicked straight out of the gym before she can say anything else. Snapping back to the present, Unchan takes a good long look at the gloves Yang is wearing and notices right away that they are open finger gloves, and his mind starts working through the implications of that, figuring that the bigger and bulkier gloves would have made it a whole lot harder for him to pull off any kind of escape when he needed to, and that the smaller ones Yang has on now change things up in a meaningful way. Unchan then starts wondering to himself whether his kimura is going to be something he can actually execute with gloves on, and the more he thinks about it the more he suspects that getting and maintaining the grip is going to be noticeably harder than it is without them. That thought then leads him to a bigger realization, which is that he is not a striker in any real sense of the word, which means putting gloves on in the first place does not actually serve any real purpose for the way he fights. Acting on that, he reaches up and pulls his headgear off completely, which immediately gets a reaction from everyone watching who cannot quite believe what they are seeing and start wondering out loud whether he is seriously planning to go into this fight without any head protection on at all. Unchan, however, finds himself thinking about the whole situation differently, and the realization that hits him is that the gloves and the headgear were never really there to protect him at all but were actually more like shackles holding him back from moving and fighting the way he naturally needs to. Meanwhile, Wang is sitting in the middle of his class, but his mind is clearly somewhere else entirely as he thinks through everything he has dug up about Jiu and Jiujitsu, starting with the fact that both of them came out of PS middle school together. From what he has put together, Jiu picked up 6 months of kickboxing training back in middle school, and while that gives him a solid form to work with, the level of brutality he brings on top of that is something that goes completely beyond what anyone would expect. As for Jiujitsu, he also went through 6 months of kickboxing around the same time, but what sets him apart is the kind of knockout power he carries in his hands, which became pretty well known after he knocked out the high school kickboxing champion while he was still in middle school. When Wang stacks all of that up against Unchan, the gap is hard to ignore since Unchan has no real striking game to speak of and is still very much a beginner finding his footing, but the one thing working in his favor is that neither Jiu nor Jiujitsu have any kind of ground game to fall back on, and the question that keeps nagging at Wang is whether Unchan is going to develop enough before Jordan finally gets back on his feet. Right in the middle of all those thoughts, Unchan's phone lights up with a notification about a live stream match going on between Yang and Unchan. Wang immediately grabs his own phone and pulls up the stream, but the quality is so bad and blurry that he can barely make out what is happening, so he raises his hand and asks the teacher if he can step out and head over there to watch it in person, but the teacher shuts that down immediately without giving it a second thought. Without missing a beat, Wang comes up with another plan and lets out a fake fart loud enough to fill the room, which leaves the teacher with absolutely no choice but to send him straight out of the class. Unchan and Yang steps onto the right while Unchan thinks he is going to get way stronger after this fight. However, Yang is furious at Unchan and wants to teach him a lesson that he won't forget. Jiu tells Yang that elbows, knees, eye-poking, and soccer kicks are not allowed, and no hitting on the back of the head. The match gets underway with Unchan dropping into his stance, and the way he positions himself is different enough from what Yang was expecting that it throws him off and leaves him visibly confused about how to approach things. One of Yang's teammates picks up on the hesitation from the sidelines and shouts at him to just charge straight at Unchan and stop overthinking it. Yang takes that advice and throws a punch at Unchan, but Unchan thinks that the hits feel noticeably sharper than he was expecting, and he figures it has everything to do with the open finger gloves Yang is wearing. His mind then shifts to what he needs to do differently compared to last time, reminding himself not to go for the same weak and sloppy takedown attempts that got him nowhere before, and deciding that he is going to try to put the techniques he picked up just yesterday into actual use. Unchan then makes his move and fakes a tackle to try and draw a reaction, but the attempt goes completely wrong and he ends up falling to the ground himself because Yang is standing way too far out of his range for it to work. Unchan rolls himself into a better position and ends up lying flat on the ground, which immediately sets off the crowd who all burst out laughing and start saying that what they are watching looks more like some kind of clown show than an actual fight. Unchan looks up and notices that Yang is not making any move to come toward him and close the distance, so he decides to get back up on his feet. The moment he is upright again he spots Wang standing off to the side watching, and that split second of distraction is all his opponent needs as Yang takes the opening and drives a kick straight into him before Unchan even has a chance to react. Yang keeps right on throwing blow after blow at Unchan, and the relentless pressure eventually sends Unchan crashing down to the ground. As he is down there, Unchan picks up on something important and notices that Yang is making a very deliberate effort to avoid letting the fight go to the ground at any point. After taking a moment, Unchan pulls himself back up the same way he has been doing, holding both arms up in front of him to use as guards, but Yang reads it and drives another punch straight into his face before he can do anything about it. Yang then shifts into a higher gear and starts unloading a whole variety of different attacks at Unchan one after another, and Unchan finds himself completely unable to find an answer for any of it no matter what he tries. The frustration starts building up hard inside Unchan as he thinks to himself that he absolutely needs to find a way to get into the guard position, but the problem is that he has no idea how to create that opening when Yang is attacking him this aggressively and refusing to engage on the ground. The crowd watching all of this is getting more and more uneasy with every passing second, and the general feeling spreading through the room is that things have gone way too far and that somebody needs to step in and put a stop to it before Unchan ends up in serious trouble. Then just when things are looking their worst, Yang suddenly runs completely out of breath and his body gives out on him, causing him to slump forward and fall right over Unchan's shoulder. The moment that happens, something clicks in Unchan's head, and he immediately recognizes that this is the window he has been waiting for. Without hesitating, Unchan throws himself into action and wraps himself completely around Yang's body and uses that momentum to drag him down to the ground. Seeing that, Wang gets shocked and realizes that what Unchan just pulled off is the jumping closed guard technique, a move that requires the person executing it to first close the distance and get within range, then launch themselves up off the ground, and then lock their feet together to hang on and maintain the position. And on top of all of that, it is considered far too risky to be attempted by white belts or anyone who is underage and still developing. Unchan meanwhile is up there figuring things out in real time, and he notices pretty quickly that Yang is not able to generate enough strength or leverage to lift his body up with just his hand planted on Unchan's neck, but that does not stop Yang from giving absolutely everything he has trying to break free anyway. As he holds on, Unchan's thoughts drift to Yunha and the task she had assigned him, where she had specifically told him to go away and think hard about how he could take the techniques they had been working on and actually apply them in the kinds of situations he was running into. Yang then decides to start throwing punches to try and force Unchan off of him, and the moment he does, Unchan reads it and makes his move, breaking the guard deliberately and rotating his body into position before going straight into the Kimura sweep. Surprisingly, the move actually works, and the entire crowd erupts in shock as they watch Unchan suddenly shift from being on the receiving end of everything to being the one in complete control of the situation. The story then dips back into a flashback where Yunha had warned him ahead of time that after landing a successful sweep, there is a pretty good chance he is going to find himself in a solid and dominant position right afterward. She had also pointed out that even if his opponent has zero knowledge of Jiu-jitsu, something in them is going to instinctively recognize that they are in a bad spot and that things have gone wrong for them. Because of that instinct, she explained, the opponent is going to start fighting and thrashing around trying to find a way out, and for somewhere between 10 to 20 seconds they are going to be flopping and struggling around like a fish that just got pulled out of the water. She then says that what Unchan needs to have is the ability to manage and absorb all that frantic movement without losing his position or getting thrown off balance so that he can maintain control. Back to the present, Yang does exactly what Yunha said he would do and starts thrashing around wildly just like she had described, twisting and shifting his whole body in every direction trying to break free. Yang then manages to fight his way back up to his feet and grabs onto Unchan in the process, but Unchan refuses to release his grip and immediately throws himself around Yang all over again, locking back on and refusing to let the position go. In a flashback, Unchan had asked Yunha what he should do in a situation where his opponent simply does not try to get back up off the ground. Yunha had answered that if the person does not have any kind of ground game to work with and is still just lying there on the ground anyway, then the most likely explanation is that they are completely exhausted and have nothing left in the tank, and that when that moment arrives he should go straight for the submission without wasting any time. Snapping back to the present, Unchan puts that advice into action and goes for the closed guard Kimura, and as he is working through it he can feel it coming together exactly the way Yunha had described it would. The crowd watching starts getting louder, with everyone telling Yang that he needs to start moving and doing something or he is going to lose this thing right here. Unchan looks down at Yang and tells him that it is over and there is nothing left for him to do. That pushes Yang completely over the edge and he loses it, yelling back at Unchan in a panic that the moment he gets out of this he is going to kill him. Hearing that threat does something to Unchan, and a dark thought creeps into his head as he deliberately twists Yang's arm. The moment it happens, the entire gym falls into a dead and heavy silence as a loud crack echoes through the room and everyone processes what they just witnessed. Right after that, one of Yang's friends comes storming in and winds up to throw a punch at Unchan, but before anything can escalate any further the coach shows up and puts a stop to it on the spot. Shortly after that, an ambulance arrives and Yang gets taken away, while Unchan is left standing there still visibly shaken and struggling to process the fact that he has just hurt someone for the very first time in his life. Wang walks over to him and tries to put things in perspective, telling him to think about all the kids that Yang had bullied and pushed around over the years, and that because of what just happened today nobody is going to be able to walk all over Yang the same way again, so as far as Wang is concerned Unchan did the right thing. Right at that moment, the purple-haired guy who had been sitting nearby earlier shows up out of nowhere and casually remarks that it was a pretty nice Kimura to watch. He then introduces himself and mentions that he is also a jiu-jitsu student and turns to Unchan and asks him straight up how long he has been training to be able to pull something like that off. Unchan tells him honestly that it has only been about a month, which visibly catches the guy off guard, and he immediately wants to know who exactly has been training him to get to that point in such a short amount of time. Before Unchan can answer, Wang steps in and pulls Unchan away from the conversation before Yunha's name has any chance of coming up. Shortly after, the teacher scolds both Jae-wee and Unchan for organizing a situation where students are fighting each other inside what is supposed to be a legitimate school club. The teacher makes it clear that he is going to go straight to the principal and push to have the entire club shut down because of what happened, but when he does, the principal steps in and takes a completely different stance, brushing the whole thing off by saying that small accidents like this are just a natural part of friendly sparring and that everyone should leave it at that and move on. On the way out, Jae-wee pulls up beside Unchan and makes a point of saying that Jordan is the one who messed everything up around here, because as far as Jae-wee is concerned, things were perfectly fine before Jordan ever showed up and inserted himself into the picture. Unchan does not let that slide though, telling Jae-wee straight up that Jordan did not mess up a single thing, and that if anything he came in and changed everything for the better. That night, Unchan heads over to the hospital to check in on Jordan, but instead of a calm visit he walks into Jordan being completely furious at him for getting into a fight with someone, especially now that clips of the whole thing are spreading all over the internet and racking up views fast. After everything settles down, Unchan sits down with Jordan and walks him through the whole situation from start to finish so he has the full picture of what has been going on. He also lets Jordan know that he has been learning jiu-jitsu on top of everything else, and hearing that immediately triggers a memory for Jordan of a bald guy who used to live next door back in the States and never stopped pestering him to get into that exact sport no matter how many times Jordan brushed it off. Unchan then gets serious and tells Jordan that when he comes back and is back on his feet, Jae-wee is not the type to just sit back and let things go, and that he honestly has no idea how many more fights are ahead of him before this whole thing is over, but that no matter what happens he is done running away from any of it. After that, Unchan makes his way over to the convenience store where he finds Yunha already watching footage of his fight on her phone. Yunha watches the takedown attempts and does not hold back her opinion, saying straight up that his takedown game is pretty much useless at this point, and as she keeps watching she starts to piece together why he ended up going straight for the jumping closed guard, figuring that he made the call on the spot because his opponent was doing everything he could to keep the fight from ever hitting the ground. Then the moment on the screen arrives where Unchan breaks the guy's arm and Yunha's whole expression shifts as she stares at it, completely shocked by what she is seeing. How long do you think it will take for Unchan to fully master the Kimura and finally stand up to Jae-wee? Comment Jiu-jitsu if you'd like a part 2 of this series. Make sure to like and subscribe the channel for more sports manhwa recaps.